Thank you. I declare open this public hearing of the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water for the inquiry into the transition to electric vehicles. Today the committee is meeting in Adelaide. In accordance with the committee's resolution, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will also be published on the Parliament's website. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing, and I remind members of the media who may be present or listening on the web of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. I now welcome witnesses from SA Power Networks to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you each please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? Who wants to go first?
Hi, I'm Cecilia Schutz. I'm our Interim Head of Corporate Affairs.
Thanks, Cecilia.
James Brown, I'm our Head of Network Strategy.
Thank you.
And Travis Kashke, New Business Engineering Manager.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussions, but just before we do that, I'm Tony Zappia, the Chair of the Committee. Dr David Gillespie, the Deputy Chair, is to my left, and Dan Rapaccioli, who's from Newcastle, Hunter in New South Wales, is also a member. Now, we may have one or two members online. Do we know if we do? Anyway, I'm sure that...
Hi, Tony. It's Bert Van Manen here. How are you?
Good, thanks, Bert. Thanks for joining us. Bert's from Queensland, and whether others do, we'll find out along the way. So, with all of that, I invite one or all of you to make an opening statement. If you keep it brief, that allows us time for a discussion.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and thank you to the committee for having us here. I'll just give a sort of brief context for our interest in this matter before inviting my colleagues to join. So SA Power Networks is South Australia's sole electricity distributor, providing electricity to approximately 900,000 of our state's homes and businesses. So SA is at the forefront of a consumer-led energy transition, particularly in terms of rooftop solar uptake, with around 35% of SA homes generating renewable electricity. This is delivering a variety of positive outcomes, but also significant challenges for the electricity network. The electrification of transport will be a key tool for using the abundant renewable energy generated in South Australian homes during the day. And as we will explain, the customer network and market benefits of soaking up that solar, in large part through electrified transport, are extensive. However, there are commensurate risks if we don't. EVs are likely to become the largest load in a customer's home. As part of our future network planning, we have forecast over 800 gigawatt hours of additional energy flowing through our network annually by 2030, an increase of almost 10% due to EVs. By 2050, EVs will have increased energy throughput on our network by 50%, and our network will be the primary distribution system for transport energy for the state. If EV charging occurs frequently during peak times, the transition to EVs has the potential to drive significant new growth in peak electricity demand, requiring significant upgrades to the distribution network. If EV charging is managed to occur mostly outside of the peak periods, our modelling suggests that SA has the potential to decarbonise the transport sector largely within our existing network capacity. If integrated efficiently, SA could expect to see significant reductions in our average network price between 2030 and 2050 because of this additional energy throughput. All things being equal, a 100% increase in energy throughput would yield a 50% reduction in unit price. This means that all South Australians will benefit from the electrification of transport, not just EV owners. Generally, the opportunity and risk of transition to EVs from a network perspective largely comes down to the ability for customers to exercise demand flexibility. There are a range of policy levers which would allow networks across the country to leverage that opportunity, and those are what we would like to focus on today.
Thanks, Cecilia. Do any of your colleagues wish to add to that? No. All good. Okay, well, we'll go straight into a bit of a discussion. Was that someone else joining us?
Yes, Jenny Ware, member for Hughes.
Thanks, Jenny. Jenny's
Thanks,
another
Chair.
one of the committee members. Look, could I just clarify, or I didn't quite catch, how much was the increase you expect by 2050? Was it 50%?
Yes. So EVs by 2050, our modelling suggests that EVs will have increased energy throughput on our network by 50%.
By 50% by 2050.
That's right.
And you mentioned, was it a figure of 800?
So we forecast that over 800 gigawatt hours of additional energy flowing through our network annually by 2030.
By 2030. Okay. I mean, those figures are one of the questions I was going to ask, so you've actually explained them in your opening remarks. From your understanding of what the energy needs might be, would it be your view that SA Power Networks is able to transition to the required energy?
So I think that you're really going into the point around demand flexibility, and if I could invite my colleague James to give you a bit of context on that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So we see this idea of demand flexibility as being the key to enabling effectively the electrification of transport largely within the existing grid infrastructure.
Yep.
So as Cecilia talked to in her opening address, if not well managed, there could be significant amounts of charging happening at peak times. And when we say peak times on the distribution network, that's between sort of 5 and 9 p.m. when maybe the fourth day of a heat wave when everybody's had their air conditioner turned on. If we have all of the EVs plugging in and charging at that time, then there's potential to drive up demand significantly on the grid, which would require a really extensive amount of network upgrades. And so the key from our perspective is how do we shift energy outside, the charging of EVs effectively outside of that period. So this idea of demand flexibility is manifested through these new electricity offers that reward customers for being flexible with their from when their EV charging occurs, optimized around the other appliances in their home. And so practically that looks like installation of what we call home energy management technology, which in some cases might delay EV charging by a few hours during a peak network event, or discharge a home battery, for example, to cover the EV charging during the peak event to avoid drawing power from the grid at that time. In exchange for this, customers who choose to participate will be rewarded through payment in their electricity network tariff. If we can get this activated en masse, we think we can avoid significant amounts of energy, significant increases to peak demand, a significant amount of unnecessary network upgrades, which improves the overall utilisation of our distribution network, reducing the unit price of electricity for customers and putting downward pressure on prices for everybody. And there are some recent reports from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency that estimate that this type of demand flexibility technology could save Australia between $20 and $30 billion across the energy transition in terms of avoided costs if we can activate flexibility in customers in this way.
Thank you. I'll go to my colleagues. Guys, if you could keep it to one or two questions and be brief, because I want everyone to have a go. I actually have a whole bunch of other questions if time allows. David?
Yeah, could you tell us a bit about what's available for vehicle back to grid? Because that's apparently part of what's going to keep the country going, is everyone's EV is going to plug in at night when you run out of energy at night. Have you got that covered here in South Australia?
Yeah, so we're very supportive of vehicle to grid technology, and actually the first state in Australia to approve and permit it to be connected to the grid. To date, there's only been effectively one kind of inverter and one device that permits vehicle to grid, and there hasn't been a lot of technology since then. We do see it as really enabling technology to maximise the value of electric vehicles for customers, and there's just a couple of kind of things that are preventing or waiting on that technology to become widespread. So
it's one customer who's done it, or one approved type of invert,
the second, the latter. So,
yeah. So if people do that, how they're going to, if they pump stuff back into the grid at night, how are they going to run their car the next morning?
So again, it comes back to this idea of demand flexibility. If everyone was to do the same thing at the same time during peak network events, that would be a challenge. But if it's managed in a flexible way, then it's not a problem.
So South Australian residents have to change their whole life around back to front?
Not really. So one of the key kind of value propositions with vehicle to grid is around, it's really vehicle to home or vehicle to load, and it's serving your own energy needs. So your car might discharge to provide energy to your house.
So your car keeps your stove going at night when you're cooking for the kids, is that it?
Not quite.
And the aircon runs off your car battery and things like that. Is that what you're proposing?
So we aren't proposing anything. We're just kind of enabling and permitting vehicle to grid to be connected to the network. Yep.
Yeah.
I think from a practical perspective, the way that would work is, a customer would come home, plug in their electric vehicle, might be their home might draw down on that during peak times, like I said, between the 5 to 9 p.m. period when they're using a lot of electricity, and then charge it up again overnight. And so
How are you going to charge it up overnight because there's no solar at night?
So maybe some numbers that might help as well is that, like, a typical or average household in South Australia uses 14 kilowatt hours of energy per day, and in the kind of peak to overnight period it's only a percentage of that, whereas a car battery, today it might be 60 to 70 kilowatt hours. It's very unlikely that the average customer actually uses anywhere near that much energy overnight, so even if they are supplementing their own
Sure.
load.
Yeah, on that same vein, in South Australia, I'm informed that you have Wi-Fi enabled inverters which can be centrally controlled, and you can ramp down the current to things through a smart meter. You can ramp down the amps. If they've got too much drawing in a house, you can throttle it down, which I thought was pretty controversial, because I've been talking about this because it's in the plan. The ISP says that is what's going to happen, but South Australia is the only place that's enabled that.
So you'd be aware that South Australia has the country's and almost the world's leading amount of renewable solar, and because of the size of our network and the amount of demand on that network, we have times now where there's minimum demand challenges, meaning there's more renewable solar generation than there is load on the network, or load that we can actually serve interstate. So because of those conditions, we need to have in place emergency backstop mechanisms that basically say we limit the amount of residential solar that goes back into the network during these minimum load times to maintain security. And this is for an entire system perspective. It's not necessarily something...
Oh yeah, I'm not talking about back into the grid. I'm talking about when there's a shortage at the other areas, when the load is big, the capacity that a household can draw down from the grid is limited.
No, we don't have any of that technology enabled in South Australia yet. Although that demand flexibility technology is what we're talking about here, something that we could trial on a reward basis with customers if they want to opt in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around, with the inverter and the device is only the one on the market. How many customers have taken that up here in South Australia?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it would be a handful of residential customers, and there's also a few commercial customers or businesses that have taken it up as well.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yep.
Would you be able to get back to us with that, please?
Certainly.
And also, if you had some things, if you gave us some information around what they think of it and how it's gone for them in periods as well.
Are you referring to vehicle to grid?
Yeah, vehicle to grid, yeah. Because you guys are the first state that's done this. In December 2022, you guys changed that. So it'll be very interesting to see, because I personally see that as a good thing later on into houses, as more people choose to go to EVs over time, or they don't choose to go. It's whatever their choice is. So I think that's a good thing. And are you guys ready? So where is South Australia situated? There's that one inverter and the current one device, the one manufacturer. If that becomes, do you guys have to regulate as those inverters and devices become more available? Is that regulated through the SA government, or is that regulated through just an Australian standard?
So there's a combination of things. None are controlled by us. Our connection processes and approval methods are ready to go. What would be required is the certification and testing of new devices to appropriate Australian standards, and then them being listed with an authority that manages a list. So both of those items are not in our realm of control. But once they're done, then they're happy to be connected, basically.
All right, thank you guys. Cheers.
Thank you. Bert, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Tony.
Bert, do you have any questions? I'll hand over to you.
I suppose my main question and my concern with all of this is that the technology really is yet to catch up with the policy. How are you managing that discrepancy between where policy is at and where technology really is at, and the consequent that on the system and for households?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of that question? I didn't quite catch it. So you're talking about technology having to catch up with federal policy?
Well, just policy more generally. I think policy across Australia in this space has moved at a pace that doesn't necessarily reflect the full technological capacity of the system at the moment, and that potentially comes at a cost to household and business. So what work are you doing to ensure that that's managed properly?
I'm not clear of your question either, Bert, and I think the witnesses are not either. Can you perhaps explain what you're trying to find out?
Or maybe an example.
What I'm trying to understand is the gap, because it was mentioned earlier in the opening statement. I think there was a gap in between the technology and the capacity to deliver on the full policy position that's been outlined. So I'm trying to understand what that gap is, and then what the cost of that is to the system, both at a household and a business level.
So I just in generally, I might hand over to my colleagues on the detail, but I think in general, what I was trying to sort of get across in my opening statement is that there is a significant opportunity through EV, and we believe that the key method to unlock that opportunity is through customer demand flexibility. There are a few, I suppose, policy or regulatory hurdles to achieving demand flexibility to its full potential at this point, and perhaps James, you could just mention a couple of those sort of policy barriers, I suppose, to achieving demand flexibility.
Sure. So I guess the key one for us is, we talked about this home energy management technology and smart electric vehicle chargers and appliances that would be required in the home to support demand flexibility. And one of the big challenges today is that all of those things can't talk to each other or communicate and coordinate in a way that works in the best outcomes for the customer and the best outcomes for the system. And so this could result in customers getting locked into or out of particular deals, or make churning between different demand flexibility offers a challenge. And so what we really need to put in place is uniform equipment standards and device communication standards. It's often known as interoperability. It's a common word that's used in industry to describe that, and effectively means that everything can communicate easily and freely, and that means that when customers buy smart chargers, they just plug and play into their energy device ecosystem within the home and play nice. The need for these standards, they're identified in the Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council's National Consumer Energy Resources Roadmap. And there's a lot of work going on in industry to support that at the moment, but some supportive policy.
Can I get that there?
The Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council's National Consumer Energy Resources Roadmap. Bit of a mouthful.
Also, just as a sort of second response to that question, in terms of our endeavours as a business to greater understand the opportunity, but also the policy hurdles, we have also recently embarked on a major project which is federally funded by ARENA called Energy Masters. Essentially, what this project is aimed at showing is, you can see that in the current landscape, for customers to optimise their home energy use, there's a lot of manual effort that goes into that. It's an incredibly complex process, and they need to do things like set manual timers on devices. Things aren't really speaking to each other, so they have to do that themselves. What this project is aiming over the next 2 years to demonstrate is the opportunity, both in terms of a positive bill impact, but in terms of just removing that manual effort and that time for customers by having technology in the homes that can do all of this talking to each other.
I think that's what the member for Ford was referring to, Tony.
Ultimately, so the final part of my question is, ultimately there is a cost to consumers for this technology in their homes. And, whilst we're in the middle of a crunch on cost of living, etc., for a variety of reasons, what is the upgrading and putting all this technology in a home or in a business, for that matter, that's going to allow to take advantage of these demand technologies?
I think it would probably be good if we come back to you on specific figures around what it might cost for in the current market for a home or business to upgrade their technology to the standards that we're talking about. But we are certainly prepared to kind of say on the record that there is no doubt that a lot of households and businesses are hamstrung by their ability to make the capital investment into the types of technology that we're talking about to allow demand flexibility. And we have been quite public in stating that there is some onus, we believe, on state and federal government to look at policies and budget measures which may support particularly low-income families, small businesses, to invest in the kind of technology they need to allow them to do this in their homes and businesses.
And I might add, as well, as that's one of the key findings that we want to make in the Energy Masters pilot, is we understand the costs of putting the technology in customers' homes as part of the pilot. And over the program with 500 homes, we will understand for those customers what the benefits are and how long, effectively it takes to pay back the investment that they put into installing this technology. So because it's an ARENA-funded project, we'll be sharing all of that information publicly through a knowledge sharing report.
Thank you, Ongit. I will go to Jenny. Jenny, are you on the line?
Yes, I am, Chair. Look, I didn't have any additional questions. I know that you did, so I'll let you take some of the questions.
Okay, no worries. Can I just go back to this question then? Does SA Power Networks intend or have any plans to establish its own charging stations?
I think the direct response to that is no, but at a federal level, I might hand over to my colleague Travis, who can talk about some of the efforts that are being made on an industry level.
Okay.
So we believe that, well, maybe some context to start. There's a variety of ways that drivers can and will charge their vehicles in the future, from ultra-fast public chargers, from something called curbside chargers, which are slower but public accessible, and also charging at home. We think there is a role for networks to support the curbside charging type of charging.
When you say to support, in what way would you support that?
So because distribution networks have the kind of infrastructure and capabilities that are widely placed and kind of regulations around how they operate, we think that it is in customers' best interests to kind of have a common infrastructure platform that could provide that kind of curbside charging. What that would be, though, is kind of the chargers themselves and the infrastructure. It wouldn't be the selling of EV services or energy. It would be kind of a common hardware platform.
Okay.
It might be useful at this point to mention the kind of the Energy Networks Australia public position on this that they've made through their Time Is Now report, which has been recently released.
So our industry association, Energy Networks Australia, has recently published this report, The Time Is Now, that talks about the benefits of a number of things, including how networks could best support EV infrastructure and the model that surrounds that.
And my only other question, and we're just about out of time, but do you see that you're able to provide the necessary power to our regional communities.
So regional networks are particularly challenging because of the types of infrastructure out there. There's no doubt there will need to be some augmentation or reinforcement in areas to support the types of charging that is needed. That may not necessarily be network upgrades. It may be new types of technologies like batteries that support the peak charging. And that's something that the aforementioned report, The Time Is Now, that talks about as well, actually.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah. Just fascinated to talk about batteries being a source to charge batteries. Like, where's the primary energy happening? Where is the load matching the demand? And it's sort of cycling in and out of a battery consumes 20% of the energy, and most lithium-ion batteries don't draw down to zero. So you put 100 watts in, you can only ever get 60 back, because 20 are locked in the battery. So you're saying you lose 20% putting it into a battery, and then you put it into another battery, so that you'll end up losing 40% of your energy just in the charging and in and out process. Is that really rational?
We can't talk to those numbers that you're mentioning, but in general, the idea would be you fill up the battery at a slower rate, say off-peak when the price is cheaper, and then you use it to basically reduce the total amount of demand or the amount of kind of charge that you need at peak times.
Yeah, I get that, but that doesn't change the energy economics. The energy return on the energy invested in a battery system is negative, negative, negative. So on a grand scale, all these electrons that the wind turbines or the solar panels are making, like I said, if you cycle it through two batteries, you've lost over 40% of your energy.
Can we get to questions rather than a debate about it?
My understanding of that, there's maybe some confusion here, is that when we're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong here, front of meter battery. So we're talking about that potentially, we don't know this for sure, but one of the efficient options might be for, if you've got, particularly in regional networks, a lot of solar generating on the network, that there may be some type of distribution level battery that could economically house that energy until such a time as customers are drawing back from the grid to fill their vehicles or use power within their homes. Is that?
That's right, and I'll put it a slightly different way in some cases in rural areas, the cost to upgrade the network to support a fast charger could be significant because the network in that area is weak, and it could be significantly less expensive to put a battery in to support charging, and the total cost of that solution is cheaper, including the energy that's going in and out, because it's using local solar and other things to charge. So that's really the use case for.
And just for clarity here, we're
batteries.
not talking about a household battery here. We're talking about a distribution level battery.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, we've reached our allocated time for this session, so I thank you all for your attendance here today. You have been asked, I think, for some additional information which you've offered to provide. If you could do that by the 8th of November, it would be appreciated. You will also be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to the committee today. If you feel you need to make any variations or changes to that, then feel free to contact the Secretariat and just do that. Once again, thank you for appearing before the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I now welcome witnesses from the South Australian Department of Infrastructure and Transport to give evidence to the committee. So, yep. And we've also got the South Australian Department of Energy and Mining. Sorry, you're doing it together? Yep. Okay. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which each of you appear before the committee? Whoever wants to go first, you're welcome. Kick off.
I can start. Peter Natras, Principal Industry Development with the South Australian Department for Energy and Mining.
Thanks, Peter.
Paul Heatherstone, I'm Chief Executive of the South Australian Department for Energy and Mining.
I'm Andy Excel, Deputy Chief Executive, Department of Infrastructure and Transport, and looks after our strategy part.
Emma Coker, I'm the Executive Director of Transport Policy and Regulation of the South Australian Department of Infrastructure and Transport.
Thank you.
Sarah Clark, Director Road Safety Policy and Reform at the South Australian Department for Infrastructure and Transport.
Damien Anderson, Principal Strategist at the Department for Infrastructure and Transport.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Tony Zappia, the Chair, David Gillespie, the Deputy Chair, Bert Van Marnen is on the line, and as is Jenny Ware, two of the committee members, and Dan Rapacharli's had to step out for another interview, but he'll be back at some stage. With that, I'm going to invite you to make an opening statement if you would like, and then we'll go into a general discussion. So, anyone want to go first? Paul?
Well, we're two separate departments under the same minister, but I'll do an opening statement. Have you got one too, mate? Or you? No, all right. So just want to do an acknowledgement of country. As guests here on Aboriginal land, we acknowledge everything this department does, these departments do, impact on Aboriginal country, the sea, the sky, its people, and the spiritual and cultural connections which have existed since the first sunrise. Our responsibility is to share our collective knowledge, recognise the difficult history, respect the relationships made over time, and create a stronger future. We're ready to walk, learn and work together. So thanks, Mr Chair and the committee, for this opportunity to present evidence to your inquiry, to assist your important work in this quite critical area. South Australia, as you're well aware, have gone through quite a journey in the renewable energy sector, and EVs and infrastructure around are a sort of critical sort of opportunity in amongst all that. Right now, today, we're running at about 74% renewable energy. On any given day, it can be 100%, and so that has started a whole lot of policy and strategic initiatives over time, which we'll sort of cover along as we go along here. We've both given separate submissions, but they actually, when you look at them together, they are very complementary. So South Australia has embarked on a strategy to become a national leader in EV uptake and smart charging by 2025. And so the clock is definitely ticking on that ambition. The Department of Energy and Mining's role has been to harness the vast resources invested in renewable energy in this state to support the transition of its vehicle fleet to electric power. We do this not only because of the environmental benefits of lowering air noise and carbon pollution, but also because as global fuel prices increase, electric vehicles provide an increasingly low-cost options for motorists. To empower consumer choices, South Australia has adopted a multi-pronged strategy aimed at supporting innovation, modernising infrastructure and encouraging ownership. Our support for innovation is demonstrated through the government's funding of smart charging trials and our input as a regulator into adopting international standards for electric vehicle equipment. In terms of infrastructure, the department has helped to secure private investment in statewide charging network to address issues such as range anxiety. Knowing that there is a network that stretches from border to border, from city to country, is an important contribution to winning consumer confidence. Thirdly, in terms of ownership, we have developed the department has developed an EV fleet pledge program to encourage all levels of government, businesses, universities, taxis and rideshare services and any other organisation that manages a fleet to transition to EVs. We've also led by example with the Department of Energy and Mining leasing its own EV models for its relatively small fleet. Taking a bigger picture, the South Australian Government has also amended the electricity recommendations to introduce a state-based electricity planning and forecasting function that sits within my department. This function allows us to better anticipate what's required in the future to ensure that the state's electricity supply capacity can meet the increase in demand reliably, securely, and in an affordable way. With that short overview, happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Well, I think there's a fair bit to cover, but I might just kick off. One of the things that your submission talks about is the Line Zero Emissions Heavy Vehicle Trial Scheme. Do you want to just, for the benefit of anyone listening in, just give us a brief overview of that?
We're looking at and working with the heavy vehicle industry and trying to bring up the uptake of EVs into the heavy vehicle space, also zero emission vehicles. So we've released a trial network across South Australia to enable that to happen. Emma Coker is sort of leading this area in terms of our regulation and how that will work with industry. So if you want to add.
Sure. So
how are we going?
We co-designed a trial with the heavy vehicle industry and released that network in September 23. To date, we've had 2 operators take advantage of that trial, and we're learning a lot about how those vehicles move. One has since moved to WA, but the one in the southeast continues to be in trial.
What sort of vehicles are that we're talking about?
We're talking about retrofitting older trucks with batteries, yes. So it's not a brand new vehicle, it's retrofitting, and the interest in the industry in South Australia is around retrofitting due to the high cost of electric vehicles at the moment.
Retrofitting, what you mentioned?
A battery.
A battery?
Yes, batteries.
To an internal combustion engine vehicle?
Yes.
And what sort of cost would that?
Around
just a
ballpark is around between 150,000 to 300,000.
To do that?
Yes.
Okay. And all right.
And with that trial, we're also, in terms of the EVs are heavier, so we're working with Austroads as a national project in terms of what the impact of these trials will be, or the weights. We're also collecting more information on our pavement network to understand what the increased weight and how that will impact, or how our network will perform over time. So we know they're heavier and they're just going to get heavier per axle. So we're trying to get ahead of the game to understand how our pavements will perform. So we want to make sure that's not a barrier to moving to this new technology to basically decarbonise the transport system.
Is any other country, to your knowledge, going through the same process of trying to do conversions?
Well, I know other states within Australia are doing that.
Other states are?
Yes, and the uptake has been similar interstate.
I'd like to just add to the points that have been made. So the company that is doing that is Janus Electric.
Janus, J-A-N-U-S Electric, out of New South Wales, I believe. And so it's viewed very favourably by industry, as the timing of the changeover, the conversion, is very favourable to when, across the life of the vehicle, they're replacing the diesel drivetrain, the diesel engine. So it's seen as very favourable by the major logistics operators that they can schedule their fleet to cross the multiple engines they might have in their vehicles over its life. They can schedule a battery changer.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have had them before us. Yeah,
that's it.
They're more advanced. I think they've done more than the wine company. But have you got any feedback from them yet about, or is it completed?
No, we're in constant contact with the operator in the southeast around.
So have you got an idea of how many miles they've done so far, or kilometres?
They're doing short range down in the southeast. They're not going across the state yet. So it's just from forest to, it's a forestry company, just from forest to depot.
Right.
But no, I don't have the kilometres. I could probably find out for you.
Oh, right. Okay. And did they, with a battery that big, do they have to have a special charger, or can they plug into like a Tesla or a standard one?
She's got her own.
Sorry?
She's got her own at depot.
Yeah.
Can I ask, what's the government doing to ensure grid stability? And Paul, I think you talked about 74% renewable energy at certain times. Along with that, how much energy do you think we are wasting because we don't have storage during peak production of renewable energy?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, you know, probably I don't think I could give you an accurate answer here, but it's a reasonable question, and I can come back to you with that.
Sure.
But you know, grid stability, you know, system security, reliability, and affordability are that's the trilemma. And security is I mean, people just don't want their lights going out, right? So that's foremost in our minds, which is why we've set up our own energy advisory group, if you like, internally within government to go at a far more granular level than AEMO do for the state, to make sure that we've got those things covered. And then there's a variety of technical answers to the question about how do we. And so for example, one of the opportunities in South Australia is because we've got so much solar here. There's a lot of energy that's generated during the day that can be spilled from time to time, depending on what's going on in the grid. And so that's why the government is one of the reasons we're setting up the Hydrogen Jobs Plan, which is to soak up that energy in the middle of the day and produce hydrogen, which then can be converted back to whatever you want later on. And I think that kind of thinking is what we're going to see more and more of. How do you take advantage of excess energy in the cycles, store it somehow, be it through batteries, through hydrogen, through pumped hydro? That's where we're going with it. And all of those things taken together add to grid stability. So the more load you have, which is why EVs are quite important here. There's a lot of technology behind it, but the more load you have, the more stable the grid is going to be.
Thank you. David, did you have any questions?
Yeah, when you say 74%, is that adding up the total consumed, or 74% across the grid on average?
It's if you go to any of the the apps that will tell you what the grid is doing on any given day during the course of ebbs and flows, but that's an average for the day, if you like. Yeah. And it'll be maximum during the middle of the day. It'll be mostly solar, wind on the fringes, and then a bit of gas in the middle of the night would be the general trend.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking at Explore Open Electricity.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what it's doing today.
We currently use the batteries that the South Australian government has invested in.
They're used all the time. They were sold. It was a private company that built those. Yep. We invested in it, yep. And it's set up. It's an interesting story because there were no standards. There were nobody was quite sure how it was all going to work, and within 6 months that had been worked out, and now all the batteries that you're seeing all over Australia use the protocols and the technology that developed at that particular time, which is a good example of what we're going to go through with EVs too now, that as things come along, we're going to have to, the technology is either going to get a bit ahead of us or we're going to have to catch up. And I think for South Australia, the big challenge is what are we going to do in the remote areas? How do we ensure when they're not connected to the grid, how are we going to ensure that there's availability for EVs in general, and certainly for long distance transport as well.
That was going to be one of my questions. I asked a question about the batteries. I wasn't clear whether we invested in those batteries for emergency periods only, or whether they were being used on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, it's used on a daily basis, but it's not a simple answer because with coal-fired, gas-fired big power stations, we actually got a lot of what they call services for free. So things like grid stability, voltage certainty, those sorts of things just came with the system, and we never actually paid for it. Once we're moving to renewables, those things have to be found as well in the absence of a big coal-fired generator, and batteries produce a lot of that. So think things like something called inertia, which is what keeps the engine running, and batteries are able to do they have set up what they call synthetic inertia and provide some of those services. So they've proven to be a really valuable part of the overall grid in terms of stability and reliability.
Okay, Bert, are you on the line? And if so, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the testimony so far. I'm interested in your last comment about around grid stability, and that from our big power stations we effectively got that for free just as part of the way they operate, and now you've got to build that into the system and account for that. All of that comes at a cost, and my concern is that nowhere have these costs, or do these costs appear to have been appropriately factored in and costed into the system, and none of these costs certainly have been discussed with the end consumers who end up paying for all of this. What are you doing to address those cost issues and minimise the cost to consumers at the end of the day? And that will only be cited as the electrification of our vehicle fleet continues to grow.
Yeah, again, it's not a simple answer to that, because the energy market system is set up to make sure that the least cost option is the one that's is presented. So as we're going through the technology, as the technology emerges, the national energy market is set up in such a way that for services that are needed, AEMO's got the ability to go out and seek bids on that, but it's constrained by rules that are set up by the AEMC and monitored by the AER. So it's a very heavily regulated sector, this one, and the very point you're making about making sure that that if technology is being applied, that it's being done in a cost effective way, and usually it's designed to reduce costs, not expand costs. So I think that the system is set up that way, and everybody's very conscious of the fact that the federal government do need to be in a position to run trials on things to make sure that the technology outcomes that are expected actually deliver. And there's quite a lot. The fact that you are dealing with mums and dads and bills and its complexity, making sure that it's affordable and usable is a key part of particularly the AEMC's considerations.
But the reality of what you're saying is that when we had a system that was operated by large generators, we required less regulation, less bureaucracy, less red tape, because everything just worked. And we're now going to a system of intermittent energy production that peaks during the day, because that's when the wind blows and the sun shines. And as a consequence of managing all of that and still needing to have power in the evening, we require a much more highly regulated bureaucratic system, and we're only continuing to add to that problem through the electrification of our vehicle fleet, the increasing needs for powering data centres and all sorts of other areas in life and business, and that no real work has been done to understand the consequences of that. We're just conducting a live experiment as we go.
Is that a question or a comment?
What's your question? You could ask, do you agree with that?
Well, that's what I'm asking. Is that effectively what you're saying in your previous answer?
No, I don't think so. I think we're doing. I mean, AEMO there's a thing called the Integrated System Plan (ISP), and so that is a gigantic modelling exercise looking at all scenarios, including the very ones we're talking about. And so they make a recommendation to the government about here are a number of paths you can go down. The one we recommend is this one, which is the least cost option. I think it's also fair to say that we closed our last coal generator some years ago, and it was just about to close anyway. They all reach an end of life, so there was a transition coming, whichever way you looked at it. And as I say, the response from the government to the change was setting up this ISP, which is, I think there's been about 3 or 4 of those now, and that sort of sets the broad framework that we can operate in, which the market regulators can draw on. And in South Australia, we've kind of duplicated that here to make sure that in South Australia's case, we've got absolute granular detail to know what's coming, and so we can react to it.
If I can just add to Paul's comments,
Go for it.
there's parallels between the electric vehicle transition and the clean energy transition, and that is that there's a very strong consumer-led component to it. So when we look at South Australia's energy generating profile, it is consumer choice. So that households have chosen to put solar on their house, on their roofs. So the regulators have responded in terms of those controls and the standards. Now, there was a previous comment made around the variability, the communications of those inverters and turning down the generation capacity. Those controls enable more households to have solar on the grid. So it's not the first movers who get the advantage. It's an inclusive regulatory model. And so the same learnings can be applied to the electric vehicle transition. Is we've got the early adopters, and there's learnings that are being gained from those people, and that is that they want choice and they don't want to have to think about it, which is where the Energy Masters program comes in. So the consumer is setting the direction for the market regulators.
Peter, just on that.
Well, I appreciate your confidence in the consumer, but may I respectfully suggest that the consumer is reacting to the subsidies that are being provided to have all of this stuff installed or to purchase an electric vehicle, etc. And the reason the subsidies are there is because consumers weren't responding in the way that was designed by the governments of the day. I think it's a response to the subsidies, not consumers leading the market. But anyway, we'll agree to disagree on that point. Thanks, Chair. No more questions.
Thanks, Bert. Peter, I was about to ask, do we monitor how many businesses or households that have solar panels actually have installed a battery as well?
SA Power Networks, I think, keep a register.
They keep a register of that? Okay. I'll go to Jenny if you're on the line, Jenny, and then I'll go back to David Gillespie. Jenny, can you hear us?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for your submission. I just wanted to ask something around your submission included that developing business cases for the electrification of public transport. What are exactly the South Australian Government's approach to decarbonising public transport? And if you could sort of talk about what sort of infrastructure you're going to use and how you intend to replace diesel, or how the government intends to replace the diesel buses.
Yeah. So we've been undertaking business case work on decarbonising our bus fleet and our train fleet. So we're understanding the technology behind that. So with our rail lines, we've already been electrifying the rail network. We have a couple of lines left to do, but there's also changing technology. We don't necessarily have to roll out further overhead wires. We can look at the electricity technology in terms of battery electric trains. So it's like a hybrid where it can charge off the overhead wires and then run for certain kilometres on its own battery and then come back and recharge. So the industry is moving quite quickly. So as part of this business case, we're looking at all the available technologies for trains. For buses, the same thing. We're looking at battery electric buses. And that's whether they're generated straight from charging from the grid or whether there's through a hydrogen fuel cell. So as part of that work, we are trialling. We have a couple of hydrogen buses running around the network, some electric buses, and we're also doing some work in hybridising our old diesel fleet and putting batteries in to reduce our amount of diesel being used. So we've got targets set through state government, through our transition plans, What we're trying to do now is understand the technology and how we're going to apply that. Federal government has also provided some money in the last budgets with the South Australian government for us to complete these business case studies and work. And that will also include how we purchase or procure new trains and new buses as well. So we're in the middle of that now, so we're expecting to finish that in the next, within the next 12 months to try and then understand to be able to approach governments for funding submissions. If we add anything else there, Damien, in terms of the...
Jenny, does that answer your question?
And do you at this stage have, can you give an approximate costing on this?
So in terms of the costings, that's what we're working through now in terms of how we might roll that out. Could it be funded as one package, or was it more likely to be through phases or to do that? So what we're doing with the buses is we're understanding there's not just buying a electric bus, that also requires a depot change. So we have to look at all our depots to where the buses and how they get charged. It's a lot more complicated than currently now, where you put the Bowser or the diesel into the bus and you go. These are very highly complex systems. That also means is how we connect to the grid as well. And it's not just a simple connecting to the grid. There has to be 2 feeds to the grid for stability, for resilience. How that's going to work, where we need to work with SAPN and DEM as well to work through that. We don't just have one depot, we have multiple depots. The other issue is with the battery technology now on the buses. It's for Adelaide, it looks pretty good to go east-west. To go north-south is a long haul, and it does the battery last in service for a bus all day, or how do you then swap buses, bring them into charge? So it's a very complex piece. So we're just trying to understand the costs of depots and costs of buses. So that's what the work we're doing now is to understand that. But it's not cheap. It will be in the hundreds of millions or more than that. It depends on how we roll that out if you add buses and trains together. So it's not a cheap exercise.
More than hundreds of millions.
Yes, it's more than hundreds of millions. Damien, you
sure? Well, I mean, buses will take place over a longer period of time. We have about 1,000 buses, so if it is say $900,000 a bus that make up a broad number, then over a long period of time, then obviously that's a significant number. We did spend our last line we electrified cost just over $900 million. We would be hoping that, even though a bit of time has passed, there's always a bit of inflation, that the newer technologies would bring the cost would be lower than an equivalent change for the future lines.
Okay, thank you. No further questions from me, Chair.
David, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I've just been on the exploreopenelectricity.org.au. It's fascinating. It appears you're about 85% in the last little while, over 30 minutes. But every day since the 11th of October, you've relied on imports. Okay? I mean, I'm not telling you anything new, but just for people who are listening. So some days your imports are about 11 to 15%. And have you modelled what happens when, like you're the end of the line and you're dependent on the imports and the gas still, even though on good weather days you've got high percentages. But to avoid South Australia blacking out again, what's the plan when Victoria gets rid of their baseload generation, because everyone's jumping on board and you're just not going to have enough generation to keep things going. So that's the first question. And then the second question is the inertia and current stability. I understood that it was the synchronous condensers spinning using electricity is what gives it synthetic inertia, not the batteries. The batteries are just there for seconds to minutes when you're switching from one, or if, God help us, you have a black start, you need a whole bunch of electricity just to kick-start the grid.
Yep.
So it's two questions.
So the first question is AEMO have got a statutory obligation to send market signals out to say if they can see trouble coming. This is what they call LOR, and they forecast what they see coming in the market, and they get the market to react. And then there's a whole series of other mechanisms where they can go into the market and purchase backup energy. Separately to that, we've got our own modelling capacity, and what they're doing is exactly what you're talking about, saying what happens when your lawn disappears, what happens when airing goes, and what happens if interconnection, we get both interconnectors down at any given time. And so we're trying to model every possible scenario that can come, and working out to the extent you can't solve for everything, but the system is set up to try and forecast as much as it can, to buy capacity to be there when those potentiality happen. The other bit of this, of course, is the interconnector. I mean, interconnectors in energy systems around the world are that's the way they work. That's you moving energy from where it's cheap to where it's more expensive, but to where the market can make more money. So interconnectors are very important. We've got 2 to Victoria, and we're building 1 to New South Wales now. The South Australian part of that is up and running now and is energised, and that's delivering another 110 megawatts, I think, already. So I guess the answer to your question is it's widening the grid nationally. It's modelling very, very carefully and looking at every scenario you can possibly come up with to get ahead of the curve and make sure the generation that you need is there. And it's surprising when the AEMO do put a bid out saying, okay, we need backup capacity. It's surprising how much comes out of the woodwork actually. So it's there to be had, but people are sort of using it to it's a market. They'll withhold generation until they see the market signals. Synchronous condensers, you're right, that was the key part of keeping the grid stable, and there's 2 of them in South Australia. It's old technology. It's basically a thermal, it's just a rotating magnet that keeps the engine turning. But batteries came up with this technology of synthetic inertia as well, so it's an additional service on top of the synchronous condensers, because there's it's a service has to be built, and there's a market opportunity there.
And precision engineering companies are able to use that, because we've had an engineer present to me a lot of harmonic circuitries happening when you have so many inverters, and a lot of high precision machines don't work. They've got electricity in them, but they need the exact frequency control.
Yeah. Well, I'd have to defer to my technical engineers to give you a good answer to that. I'm a geologist, so I'm struggling with this. I'm at the limits of my ability right now.
Sure. Okay. And have you modelled other places where they've gone down this route that we're going with the ISP? Like the California grid, or
the ISP plugs into all of the other system operators, like the California grid, the New York. There's another one. There's a number of places around the world that are kind of in a similar sort of proposition. So the ISP draws on all of that, and then it's a gigantic, supercomputer modelling exercise to sort of bring all that together. So it's a lot of work with inputs from everywhere.
Okay. So you're a mining engineer.
Geologist.
Oh, geologist.
Yeah, big difference.
Are you an engineer? Sorry? Hands up engineers, electrical engineers.
Not electrical, civil.
Civil, yeah, oh good. We have a real live engineer. Okay, that's good. Thanks very much.
The people you need are actually all overseas at the moment, so unfortunately, so we get for the B team.
Yeah, okay.
Paul, in your opening remarks, you touched on ensuring that the regions are also able to provide the necessary electricity. What's the state government doing to ensure that that is the case?
Well, we're trying to. I'll get Peter to talk to this, but the department runs, most of the regional standalone generating capacity. And what we're trying to do over time is make them all sustainable. A recent example, it's not part of our grid, but it's at Coopedi.
Yep.
There's a company set up who run batteries, solar, wind, and a diesel backup, and the diesel runs 10% of the time, maybe. That's kind of the model for distributed networks around Australia. But the challenge is from going to just supplying a local community to now being part of a larger grid. There is a cost differential, and that's part of the challenge of how do we deal with that. Peter, do you want to talk some more about that?
Yeah, I think there's the way that within the department that we are dealing with it is a bit of a change in our mindset of how we're looking at regional grids. Is that they have moved into be increasingly about transport critical. So we look at historically, they've provided power to houses and businesses for the things that we'd normally expect. But we now need to plan for them to be an integral part of the transport system. So that's where the comments that SA Power Networks made prior to us attending. It is looking at those the distribution of energy storage across the grid. It's about not upgrading poles and wires in between. It's looking at what the fit for purpose technology set is at the end of a wire. That actually could create new business opportunities for companies other than the network operators, for example, in energy storage and then the charging of vehicles, or it actually could enable more solar penetration at the end of those wires as well. So it's really thinking as to where the consumer is headed, again, and looking at that we have the technology. We have to then look at the timing and the economic rollout of that.
Sure. In terms of electrifying heavy transport and public transport, have you not looked at not just electric buses with batteries, but with hybrid systems, or I might suggest electrification with trams, trains, or even buses? You can get electric buses, that have the thing goes up to the with wheels, rather than having to put tracks in everywhere. You just got electricity, up above, and you run around, and you got no emissions. You just got electric motors running buses, no digging up roads. It's just plonk a pole and have things going over to it. Have you looked at that?
Well, yeah, that's part of the business case work we're doing in terms of that technology sort of report we're putting together. So, like you said, there's other options like electrical induction charging. If a bus pulls up to a bus stop, can it charge up through a loop or an overhead system? Same with our tram network. You could have trams without poles and wires. It might have a third line underneath, or same thing, it sits to a tram stop. Can it charge fast enough to get enough energy to get to the next tram stop? So there's various technologies, but what we've got to do is put that into we call a concept of operations, is how does all that work actually running and providing a service for the community? So it has to be that resilience, sort of service, that if it doesn't meet the service needs, then that technology, we just have to wait. And the cycles of technology are moving quite quickly. If we go back 5 years, in terms of battery capacity itself is just quite amazing how much capacity you can feed in now. So and that's why I said getting to Adelaide is a very long city, so getting electric vehicles or buses to move north-south is a bit challenging. East-west is a lot easier. So short haul, which Emma talked about with the heavy vehicles, that seems to be the first part to sort of work through these processes. But at the same time, we need to keep abreast of technology and what's happening through Europe, Americas, etc. So that's what we're doing with our business case, technology sort of report. And then we won't just sit there and finish. It would say in another 2 years we'd have to look at that again, because technology will shift again. So we've got to be careful we don't lock ourselves into one solution, but we've got to be cognizant of future technology as well. And yes, if we can avoid digging up roads or networks, that's a cheaper view if you can get the technology in the actual fleet. in the bus, in the train. That would be a smarter way to go, which what Damien was alluding to is, we think it will be, cheaper rather than the old technology.
Yeah, I might direct you to, I'm pretty sure it was Bordeaux.
Mm-hmm.
They've got trams on, rails, but they don't have wires. You just come into the station, it flicks up for 30 seconds or 90 seconds while you're in and off. It's charging, and then no wires all over the place. It's a really clean system.
Does the state government have any intention of having its own recharging points or stations that would be available to the public? I think the RAA is investing in some.
So the approach that the government has taken was to support the private sector to move into the provision of services. So the short answer is no.
Okay. So, which leads to my next question. I've heard that in some cases, recharging stations, and this is interstate, were charging prices that literally meant that the cost was comparable to burning petrol. Is there any plans to at least manage the cost that is being charged by the independents, by the private sector?
Well, with the RAA, we put conditions on that, didn't we?
Yeah.
From memory. So, you want to talk that something through?
I mean, just to perhaps put that into more context, at least with the petrol companies, we now have, a just-in-time petrol disclosure price and so on, which allows consumers to know what they're going to pay. Is there something similar being planned for recharging stations?
There's no plans to regulate that. So there's the important thing to also remember is that the vast majority of any electric vehicles charging will occur in a home environment, most likely, or in a workplace. And if we look at the pricing, the total cost of ownership, that there will be some expectation that they'll be needing to charge whilst away. And it's important that the private sector is able to recover the cost of capital for that investment and the operating costs over time. And so this is expensive electrical equipment. And so in order to ensure that consumers have access to this infrastructure, for example, when they go to the regions, it's important that that they're able to have price that reflects the cost of providing that service. The important thing is to get the competition to follow. And when that market matures, that's when ultimately it'll be that cost will reflect competition.
Okay. Just about reach the end of our time session with you. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to add to what's been discussed today? Is there any other information that you want to bring to the committee's attention?
It's to, I think, reinforce the importance of planning ahead with smart grids, smart technologies, and it's about that consumer-centric approach. It's about empowering the consumer to make sure that they have control of the devices and that they're able to port those devices, just like 20 years ago we looked at mobile phones and the need to be able to move your number without all the hassle. It's the ability for the consumer to be in control and for them to be able to interface with their home, and it's having those supporting the private sector to innovate in that area, to have the retail office, but making sure that interoperability, that the consumer remains in control, that it's not aggregated up into large entities, that if it's whoever's paying for that equipment needs to have a business case so they can recover the cost of that equipment.
All right. Well, with that, I thank all of you for your appearance before the committee today and also for your submission to the committee. I think you have been asked for some additional information. If you could provide that to the Secretariat by the 8th of November, that would be greatly appreciated. You will also be sent a copy of the transcript of the evidence that's been provided to the committee today. And again, if you feel that there needs to be any changes or additions made to that, feel free to do so. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. The committee will now suspend for around 10 minutes. and we will resume at about 10:30 or just before. This hearing into the inquiry into the transition into electric vehicles, and I welcome witnesses from the Motor Trades Association to give evidence to the committee today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
My name is Jodie Ryan and I'm the General Manager of Apprenticeships at Motor Trades Association.
Thanks, Jodie.
And my name's Case Sillison. I'm the General Manager of Media Marketing and Policy for the Motor Trade Association.
Thank you. And again, for anyone hearing and for both of you, I'm Tony Zappia, the Chair. Dr. Dave Gillespie to my left is the Deputy Chair, Dan Rapaccioli to my right, the Member for Hunter. And we have Bert Van Maanen from Queensland, and Jenny Ware is, where's Jenny from? Jenny Ware is one of the other committee members. Is Jenny from your part of the floor?
Yeah, she's from the seat of Hughes, which is Sydney.
And they're both online, so they will be participating in this hearing. With that, I invite you to make... Sorry, I should go through one of the formalities which you might have heard me say earlier on. Although the committee doesn't require you to give evidence under oath, I advise that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. With that, I invite you to make an opening statement and then we'll go into some questions.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Yep.
Thank you to the committee, those in person and online. I've mentioned before, my name is Case Sillison. I'm the General Manager of Media Marketing and Policy, Motor Trade Association, and thanks for the opportunity to give evidence today. The Motor Trade Association South Australia and the Northern Territory is an employer association with a proud 98-year history. As well, we are a registered training organisation and a group training organisation. We're not for profit across everything we do, or as we like to say, profit with purpose. Every dollar the MTA earns is reinvested into our member services, apprentice training and overall industry support. As an association, we represent the interests of about 1,300 members in South Australia and the Northern Territory who collectively employ more than 15,000 people in the automotive, retail, service and repair sector. Our members span the entire automotive supply chain in Australia, from the retail sale of cars, trucks, motorcycles, farm machinery, through the repair sector, service stations, towing, all the way through to when a vehicle is recycled at its end of life. In regards to electric vehicles, I thought I'd just start with some numbers, and the latest car sales for South Australia shows us that the growth in buyers choosing a full battery electric vehicle is slowing. Last year's explosion in EV sales has moderated. While electric vehicle sales are up 27% year to date, the market share of all new cars sold in South Australia has actually gone back. We're at 6.5% of all new cars sold are a battery electric vehicle, down from its peak of 7.3% in March. Today, consumers are showing a preference, or a stronger preference, I should say, for hybrids and plug-in hybrids, which are experiencing the greatest surge in sales this year. To the committee members, I would say that we know that incentives for consumers to get electric vehicles matter. South Australia, like most other jurisdictions, has removed generous $3,000 incentives for the purchase of a new electric vehicle. And anecdotally, we're hearing from our members and their customers that this was an important factor in convincing consumers to transition from cheaper combustion vehicles. More broadly, we support measures to encourage the uptake of all zero and low emission vehicles. This includes expanding incentives for the purchase of electric, hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles, as well as reconsidering the sunset on fringe benefit tax for plug-in hybrid vehicles. Whether for work or lifestyle, it's fair to say that South Australians and Australians more generally love their utes and 4x4s. This is why we need to be cautious not to penalise those without affordable or fit-for-purpose electric vehicles, such as tradies, holiday makers and rural and regional individuals who might rely on their ute to get them about their day. From the Motor Trade Association's perspective, purchasing an electric vehicle is the easiest part of our transition. And it's the position of the MTA that it's what comes after this which requires deeper consideration for the government. While there's been plenty of talk regarding public charging infrastructure, and it is of critical importance, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, MTA General Manager Apprenticeships, Jodie Ryan, to talk about the hidden challenge of skilling our country for a growing uptake of zero and low emission vehicles.
Thanks, Kays. To give you a picture of what we do, MTA Training and Employment train more than 1,100 apprentices in South Australia across 10 automotive trades. We effectively train half of all automotive apprentices in the state and are the national leaders in electric vehicle training. Our job at the MTA Training and Employment is to make sure that apprentices, skilled technicians and businesses are ready for whatever enters the workshop. In addition to apprentice training, we upskill qualified automotive technicians in a range of sectors like mining and emergency services through a range of defined pathways in electric vehicle and automotive electrical skill sets and qualifications. In June last year, the MTA launched South Australia's first dedicated electric vehicle training centre with the South Australian Premier. All apprentices in automotive trades leave the MTA with a HEV-BEV safety training as part of their apprenticeship. Earlier this year, we successfully applied to the South Australian Skills Commission for Australia's first automotive dual trade apprenticeships, light vehicle and heavy vehicle combined with automotive electrical. This pathway is designed to prepare the future technicians for the transition to the EV and advanced electrical systems found in cars today, commonly known as ADAS or assisted driver assistance systems. Commonly, these are just the parking sensors and the cameras within the vehicle. In the past 3 months, we've had 10 sign-ups to our dual trade, and that's expected to spike in the coming months as workshops prepare their supervisors. According to Jobs and Skills Australia, South Australia has 10,000 automotive technicians who require some sort of electric vehicle training. This is critical in the safety training like depower and reinitialise electric vehicles, which is already very popular in collision repair, or it might be involved in operations and servicing training for those involved in working on the repair and service of electric vehicles. Nationally, the Certificate 3 in automotive electric vehicle technology exists, but in South Australia there is currently not enough demand for electric vehicle only technicians. There is no apprenticeship pathway currently for this qualification in South Australia also. At the MTA, we expect a long tail for combustion technology, whether this is through hybrids, plug-in hybrids, or simply petrol or diesel vehicles over the next 20 to 30 years. Apprentices starting in the automotive industry today will require a Swiss Army knife of skill sets to be able to work on whatever enters the workshop. This is why we are focusing heavily on automotive electrical upskill and dual trade pathways, because regardless of a vehicle's drivetrain, there's just so much technology in the modern car. In closing, I encourage the committee to strongly consider measures which incentivise businesses, technicians and apprentices to train and upskill in automotive electrical and electric vehicle skill sets to meet the growing numbers of zero and low emission vehicles on our road. Thank you.
Thanks, Jodie, and thanks, Kays. I'm going to kick off with this question. Kays, you talked about the number of electric vehicle sales having dropped to 6.5%. Putting aside that's, I take it, 6.5% on an annual sales basis.
That's a year-to-date, so it balances every vehicle that's sold.
Sure.
Yeah.
What percentage of the vehicles that are currently on our roads do you believe are electric vehicles?
Yes, that would be about 1%. It'd be. I don't have the numbers of exact, and I'm happy to take it on notice to come back. But yeah,
but it's around 1%. But anyway, if you've got a more updated figure, if you could provide that to the committee, that'd be good. I'm going to go to my colleagues, and then I'll come back to, because I do have other questions. David, did you want to go next if you're ready?
Oh yeah, the pump, not pumped hydro, the plug-in hybrid seems to me the one that's going to work if EVs are going to work on a mass level. Are you finding that that's what consumers are heading towards, or already moving rather than the full electric?
To give you a snapshot, plug-in hybrid is a growing segment, and it will likely be an important segment once the federal government's new vehicle efficiency standard comes into play from the 1st of January next year. The reason for that is because I think it's fair to say the passenger inner city market is actually pretty good for electric vehicles. You can get a pretty affordable electric vehicle that can get you about your city runabout. For myself, working in the city, going home to work, plugging into solar at home. For those that have to either have payload. They, like my brother, as a painter, fill up the ute, take a trailer, go off to Moonta, come back. Or for those that are just simply geographically, not isolated is not the right word, but they live in rural and regional locations. Full battery electric vehicles and full battery electric utes are not currently, and I believe one day they will be, but not currently fit for purpose for them. And that is why you're seeing manufacturers such as the likes of Ford, BYD just in recent days announced the Shark as a plug-in hybrid option. You know, they'll have, let's say, 100, between 50 to 100 kilometres of battery range with petrol to back it up, and the ability to, importantly, like I said, tow that caravan, take that trailer, fill it up with everything it needs to be on the back. So, plug-in hybrids are actually quite low. They're about, less than 2% of all sales. But they've actually, as I said, they've come off a low base but are accelerating quite quickly. And I think that's the segment where they'll have an important role to play.
Is that 2% of the 6.5%, so 1/3, or 2% of all new?
So, of all new cars sold. So I'll tell you that year to date, so this is talking about all new cars sold in South Australia up until the end of September this year, 1.6% were plug-in hybrid. And I may as well just run off the other numbers.
Sure.
Hybrid, 16.3%, and electric vehicles, 6.5%. Now, when I add those together, this is what I commonly refer to in when I talk to decision makers in government, is that roughly 1 in 4 vehicles, new cars sold in South Australia, are zero and low emission. So talking to Jody, the skill sets that they're training apprentices and technicians on, it doesn't really matter whether it's a hybrid, plug-in hybrid or electric vehicle. High voltage and the type of training and reskilling they need is effectively the same.
What was the 16% that you...
Just hybrids, thinking like your Camrys, your RAV4, that type of thing.
6% or...
Sorry, 6.5% battery electric, 16.3% hybrid, so your Camrys and RAV4s, and then 1.6% plug-in hybrids, so think like the Mitsubishi Outlander. It's a popular...
So what's the difference between a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid?
Okay, well, a plug-in hybrid is indeed, it's got it plugs in, it can charge the battery off that, whereas a hybrid, what I call a quote-unquote traditional hybrid, has a battery in it, but it is recharged by the engine as well as regenerative braking, so you don't plug it into anything. So you might get, instead of running 100% of fuel, you might get 70% and a reduction of 30% in emissions on average.
Thanks for that. Sorry, David, to interrupt.
Yeah, well, that was what I was looking for, but it looks like the hybrid is the winner at the moment. That works for people. The dual trade, can you bolt on a course to an existing trained apprentice, practitioner, someone who's working in the auto electrics or mechanical electrics in cars? Can they do a upgrade course and then they're certified, or do they have to go through a whole separate training scheme?
All right, there's a couple scenarios in that. So if you're a qualified technician, we do an upskill. So it's we call it a qualified technician pathway. And there's 10 units at a difference between the normal light vehicle qualification or the traditional mechanic to an auto electrical qualification. There's 10 units, so we upskill them in 10 units over a period of time, and that becomes effectively they're dual traded. Further from there, to sort of transition them further to the electric vehicle market, which will be happening, they can then add another 10 units on top of that, another upskill for the Cert 3 in electric vehicle technology. So we haven't had a lot of uptake for that one at the moment, so we're just preparing that workforce, because a lot of the workforce now are looking for how are they going to train their current technicians to start servicing EVs in 10 to 12 years' time or even 5 years' time. And taking somebody with mechanical only knowledge, you have to really retrain them into that auto electrical, the systems, and then into the EV. So it's a pathway.
Not just a little thing, it's quite a...
No, it is quite a significant, and that's probably one of, when I talk to a lot of my clients in the RTO, with 1,100 students, that's their biggest concern, is how are they going to train their current workforce to what comes in. And the solution for us that we've picked is rather than having multiple technicians, one light vehicle technician, one auto electrician and one EV technician, you have that, I call it the triple threat. You have that one technician that can do all. They become a super technician, they become highly employable, and they continually that their skills in the trade as they go on.
Yeah.
Maybe for apprentices as well, and the difference between that with dual trade.
And same as dual trade as well. That's why we approached the Skills Commission last year to get a dual trade, because the apprentices of today, by the time they come out in 4 years, 5 years, need to have that knowledge of, auto electrical to start preparing them further to be the technicians for electric vehicles.
So they're a mechanic as well as an auto electrician.
Yeah.
And then you just do the battery
later on. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Dan, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do, Chair. Thank you. The dual trade, a few more questions on that. The 10 modules to become the auto elec and dual trade, and then the 10 modules on top of that to work with electric vehicles. How long are those processes?
Well, it really depends on how fast that we do it, but we generally do it over a period of blocks. Yep. So we do it 4 blocks over a period of a year, because that allows them to learn the material and then go back into the workplace and actually practice it in the workplace. Yep. So we do it differently to a traditional lockstep where you come in for 6 weeks and you walk away with the qualification. That really doesn't mean much unless you're practicing in the workshop.
And with the dual trade, for the new apprentices that are coming in, does that add extra time to their trade, or can they get it done in the 4-year period as well?
Yeah, so it does. It adds an extra year.
Yep.
So it becomes a 5-year apprenticeship, and what it does is it increases their wages as well. They now get paid 95% of a technician at that. So a 4th-year apprentice would normally get paid 88%. So into entering that 5th year, they'll get paid at 95%.
And so do they do the training along the lines of they do their auto elec first and then their mechanical, or their mechanic and then auto elec? Because if you're a qualified mechanic, they should be getting paid being a qualified mechanic.
That's right. So
and then they just are getting what they need to go do that last bit of that training.
So what our training plan that we've designed is actually putting them both together, because if they're a proper dual trade, learning one trade first is not a dual trade.
That's right.
So we actually stick them together, so they do the principles of electric and mechanical within 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th year. So it dovetails off each other, that they're learning both trades at the same time.
That's great. That's really good. And for the mechanics for the ones that are just doing mechanical, the HEV-BEV, can you give us a bit of information on that?
Yeah. So so we have two. Are you talking about the qualification HEV-BEV? Or?
No, that they just do they get training on HEV-BEV in their apprenticeship?
Oh, yes.
Becoming a mechanical.
Yeah.
Becoming a mechanic.
So any automotive technician that we have as an apprentice, so that covers heavy vehicle, mobile plant, ag, as well as light vehicle and heavy vehicle. They all walk away in their 4th year with the, we call it the HEV-BEV safety course, which is the depower and reinitialise. They all do that as part of their apprenticeship. It prepares them, if they see an EV in their workshop, they might not necessarily be working on it because they're an apprentice, but it gives them the understanding and awareness of what they need to do to be safe.
Yeah, okay, yes.
That process. No, as far as I'm aware, no other training provider does that.
Yep.
So we're the only ones.
Can I just add, I mean, this is at the core of the MTA's philosophy and approach. The curriculum is incredibly important and is established nationally, and it comes down to training providers who contextualise that, and we create course content. The MTA is not obliged to give this to our apprentices, but we feel that we are incredibly responsible in terms of what these, as products, as individuals, as employable individuals in the workplace, that they deserve that basic foundation of the safety. So,
and I think the fact is too that we have an electric vehicle centre which is state of the art. Not sharing that with our apprentices is a disservice to them.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent, good work, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Jenny, are you on the line? And if so, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your submission. I've got a couple of questions. First, what factors do you say are the reasons why there's been a slower uptake from automotive engineers in undertaking the training?
So I didn't get that last bit.
Why is it a slow uptake?
For
of
dual
taking
trade?
the training? Yeah.
Yep. So the reason there has been a slow uptake for dual trade to start with is because there's a registration process that they have to go through. So every person that takes on an apprentice, they have to have be a registered employer. So they have to apply for that, which generally takes between 4 to 6 weeks to apply for that process. And additionally, they have to upskill. You have to have a supervisor that's got either 2 supervisors that's got auto electrical and the mechanical technology one, or we upskilling those supervisors to that with our qualified technician program. So there has been a slow uptake preparing the supervisors for that.
Most automotive engineers are small business people. What incentives, or are there going to be any incentives for them to send their staff and apprentices off for this additional training?
Just the government incentives that come with an apprenticeship. So it's still they get there's a new incentive. I can't remember what exactly it's called.
The New Energy Apprenticeship Program,
which covers auto electrical. So anyone under a dual trade can access that additional funding.
What's it called? The New
Energy Apprentice. I think it's New Energy Apprenticeship NEAP program.
Yeah.
I suppose, and that's, we had Brendan O'Connor come visit us and announce the expansion of that, because when it was initially announced, it was quite narrow. You had to be working on just EVs, and as hopefully we've described, that's quite rare and difficult to have.
Yeah.
So, we're trying to find opportunities where, let's take a dealership. If you're working in a dealership that sells BYDs, you've got a good chance you're going to be working on those. Or, you might be just working on a lot of hybrid Camrys, again, with the skill sets that would enable that apprentice to unlock the incentive as a way to keep them engaged.
What is the cash value of the...
10 grand.
10
I think
grand.
it's in
It's 10,000.
Staged over 4 payments.
Yep,
of
4 payments.
2,500 in the first
And
year or
that's
two.
to the apprentice, not the employer.
Yes.
That's right, yeah.
And I suppose, now that you mentioned that, it's probably for us one thing that we're watching very carefully, because in the last federal budget there was a reduction in employer incentives more broadly for employers to take on an apprentice at a cost of living time where businesses are faced with the same sorts of household pressures that we all feel. Combined with that reduction, we are watching closely, and probably coming into the next budget cycle, we'll probably have, through the MTA, nationally, and the MTAA, Australian Association, more to say about, how can we stimulate employers to create opportunities.
Yes, thank you. So I think the answer to my question that there are incentives there for apprentices to take up the training, but there's no incentive provided to small business people. For example, the principal of the company who is not an apprentice, for him or her to undertake the training themselves, or for them to allow other staff to leave to go and do the training. I mean, it's one thing to give the apprentices the opportunity, which is good, but small business people can't afford, they just can't afford to have people off doing this sort of training when they've got their existing customers to service. So but it seems that you have given that some thought. There's nothing there at the moment, but it'd be something that you'd need to be looking at in the next budget.
There is something there at the moment. There is Commonwealth incentives for commencements and completions, and they have been reduced, but there is something there for the employer.
Right, they've been reduced. Was that in the last budget?
Yeah.
Last federal budget.
Yeah.
Do you know what cash value that is?
So they were.
I think there was I think regional and rural had a slight. I think it was about max was probably 18. I think if you're regional and rural, for majority metro was about 15,000.
15,000.
Sorry, yeah, 15,000 for most, and then 18 maybe if you were rural and regional.
That's what it was, and now it's dropped to 5,000. Now it's dropped to 5.
And is that in upfront, or as
more of it was,
that was over a period of about at the 6-month mark you would get it, and then at the completion you'd get it. But I think now it's been reduced to 5,000, and it's a one payment at the 3 or 4 month mark.
Yeah, it's pretty upfront now.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Bert,
Thank you. That's
thanks,
it for me,
Julie.
Chair.
Bert, are you on the line? And if so, do you have a question?
I'm here, thanks, Chair, but I don't have any questions at this point. Thanks.
Okay. By the way, we'll be heading down to the MTA training facility this afternoon, so thanks for that, and it should be interesting to go down there and have a look. One of the questions I had was, are the manufacturers of the vehicles providing the MTA and anyone else with all the relevant information that is needed to train the apprentices? Or are they keeping their designs secretive so that you have to go back to the dealership for any ongoing maintenance?
Yeah. So there's a couple facets to that. So each car has schematics and wiring diagrams and all of that processes, and that's accessed through ASRA. So we have an ASRA account, so we can basically get the schematics and understandings of any car. Tesla's a little bit harder. They do keep their secrets a little bit more.
Yeah.
We don't train on a Tesla. We train on a range of other electric vehicles as well. So,
yeah, and what I would say is that through ASRA, there's been a lot of discussions about some of the information being made available. Where, without naming names, there's going to be, by some estimates, 40 new models of EVs coming into the country by the end of next year. It's an exciting time, but at the same sense, we're mindful that there may be some that either are slow or and hopefully not resistant in terms of making that information available through ASRA. It's protected at the moment. You can't just get EV information if you're not qualified in electric vehicle, like the depower and reinitialize, the safety training, which is, we support that. That's there, but we don't want to see a situation where businesses, training providers are prevented from accessing, even emergency responders, critical information.
Did you have something, Dan?
Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
Just wondering what the cost is to go and do the dual trade. So once you're already a mechanic and say I own the shop, I got 10 mechanics working for me. What does it cost to send one mechanic to go to become the auto elec? Yep. And then what's the next cost of the next 10 modules after that to be a proper EV? Yeah.
So at the moment it's a fee for service. Well, there's a couple scenarios for that, because if you're a qualified technician already, you could access it. You can go onto a second apprenticeship and you can access it so it's fully funded.
Yep.
If you don't and you do a fee for service, which is just you come in and you pay for it, it's about $5,500.
$5,500. So if the apprentices are getting $10,000 for doing it, they're coming out all right of it at the end of the day.
So the apprentices, if it's fully funded, they don't pay for it. The employer pays for it. It's only if someone else wants to do it as a fee for service. Yeah, so they are coming out of it really quite well. And it's the same price for the EV qualification too. Another $5,500 on top of that.
Yep.
That's not funded at the moment under an apprenticeship scenario at all in South Australia. So that has to be a fee for service.
And is that because there's not such an apprenticeship for that yet? It's just extra modules added on to your if you're already a mechanic.
Yeah. It's just for the qualification. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one final question from me. Looking at apprenticeship numbers more broadly, is the MTA able to take in more apprentices than it currently has, or are you operating at your maximum capacity?
I'm always happy to take more.
So there is,
Yeah.
I could reverse it and say, are enough people taking up the apprenticeships that based on the spaces available?
So for us, for training, in the last 18 months, we've increased from 830 students to 1,100 students, and we have capacity for more. So, and I think it's purely because of the way that we train with, new technologies, dual trades. For us, it's been a really great uptake.
On the employment side and employer side, there is certainly a feeling amongst, the employers we talk to that they are becoming a bit more selective in regards to giving a young person an apprenticeship opportunity. They're still facing skill shortages and they still need labour in the workshop. Again, I think we're at a point now where we're watching very closely what's happening with, like I said, the economy, with some of the incentives for businesses and how they respond. We're now sort of 6 months through it, but we still have a great interest from both apprentice and a young person and employer side. So
I'll give you an idea. We probably put on an additional 200 apprentices per year through the training centre. Obviously, you got 200 coming in, and there's people completing. But on average, we're still doing 200 additional enrolments per year.
What sort of dropout rate do you get? Do you have any figures on that?
that's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
So nationally, you'll say with trades, 2 people go in and 1 drop out, and it sort of can vary a little bit either side.
Yeah.
But that experience is true in automotive, and we know that the first 2 years are the big risky years. A young person out of school.
Yeah.
And with credit to the South Australian government, have run a mentor program where we have a automotive specific mentor. He's from the industry. He works with us, with anybody who trains with the MTA, to help keep them in the industry. And through that program, we've seen a retention rate of 98% from first to second year.
Okay.
The numbers are really encouraging in that space.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Question on this? Yeah, I've just been wargaming if I was applying for an apprenticeship. Are you what would be called, this is on the government side, are you a group training organisation or you are RTO?
We are both.
Both?
Yeah, so we employ over 450 apprentices, and we train them as well, but we also train an additional 600 apprentices from industry where somebody else employs them, and they choose to come to us as their training provider.
So that makes you the group trainer, but the people that you employ, you're a RTO for your own business. Do you fix cars and things like that?
No, we don't fix cars, so we purely just employ. So we employ as a GTO and host them out to employers.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then we train as well, so we don't have any commercial
Operations
at all.
Oh, okay. So if you go down to Madiki Motors, say you're employed up front by you, and what, you give them a trainee for free, or?
Oh, no, they pay for it.
They pay for it. So we look after their recruitment, the paperwork, all the contracts together with the apprentice support network provider. We provide them with all of the ongoing visits that are required for a group training organisation, 8 weeks with the apprentice and the employer, make sure everything is going well. Pastoral care, all of those sort of things are bundled in. And yes, it works at a award plus a margin to be able to make it work for the business. They have flexibility, and that's great for businesses if in terms of we might have an apprentice that is not the right fit for them. We can find them another opportunity. They might be great in a dealership environment, but not so much in an independent mechanical repair workshop. So that flexibility is quite good for employers.
And has every state got somebody like you? Is MTA in New South Wales doing similar thing?
Yeah, so MTA in WA is also group training. MTA New South Wales is not a group training, they're just a training provider and membership.
Yeah, and Victoria's a group training provider.
Yep, Victoria's, and Queensland is as well.
Yeah. It's probably the only, of all the MTAs around Australia, we're probably the only, as far as I'm aware, that do, employer association, training and employment through the GTO.
Right.
Okay, there'll probably be other questions when we visit the plant this afternoon, so that'll be a good chance to pursue the issue. Once again, thanks for your attendance here today and for your submission. I think you were asked a couple of questions that you might be able to provide some additional information on, and if you could do that by the 8th of November, that would be appreciated. You'll also be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to the committee, and if you feel you need to make any changes to that, again, contact the Secretariat. With that, thank you very much, and we might see you this afternoon down there at your facility.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you.
Thank you. It'll be great fun. Chair, would it be okay to grab a photo with Jodie and I? We're not too busy on the way out.
Sure.
It's very photogenic too.
No, it'll be with the committee, so you'll be on it too.
Yeah.
So you're going to wait till the end of the hearings? Or do you want to do it now?
If there's a quick moment to do it now, we'll just do it and we'll be on our way.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's quickly do it. get my head around what I'm doing. I now welcome witnesses from the Flinders and Adelaide universities to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
My name is Nessim Ertugrul from University of Adelaide.
I am Amin Mahmoudi and I'm a senior lecturer from Flinders University.
Thank you. Although the committee doesn't require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite each of you to make a brief opening statement and then we'll go into a discussion and some questions. So who would like to go first?
My name is Nessim Ertugrul. I'm an associate professor at the University of Adelaide since 1994. My background is power electronics. I've done also my PhD in a similar area. If you are not familiar, but the power electronics is really the enabling electronics technology which makes all the renewable technologies from wind, solar, grid connection to the electric vehicle aspects. And then recently I also involved with a technical book. I brought a copy of here, which was about reinventing the power grid, renewable energy storage and grid modernization. Grid modernization is a part of this somehow activity as well as electrification. Although it may also look like diverse, when I hear the electric vehicle, I also give some evidence before in different hearings. Electric vehicle I consider is the vehicle which is mobile, covering from sea vessels to air vessels to the buses and trucks and then normal car. One reason is that this power electronics is really the main part of it, which controls charging, discharging, controlling electric motor aspects, as well as the connection to the grid aspect. Therefore, from the application viewpoint, those doesn't divert. It's the same thing. Even the one vehicle used in mining, which I also started that initiative at the University of Adelaide as a part of the FBI, stands for Future Battery Industries for Mining Industry, part of the CRC. We also look at the electric vehicle aspects on that arena, which is growing fast. I guess briefly in EVs, I can probably talk about a few key issues. As we all know, we need batteries of some form of. Batteries come in different shapes and sizes, but the key aspect is, of course, their power density. When I say power density, I mean two parameters. One is the volumetric as well as the gravimetric, means volume and then weight. If this is higher, that's best, because this application is, these type of batteries are very suitable for mobile applications because you are carrying as a payload. Other aspect is the efficiency of the system, of the auxiliary systems. That system includes electronics driving the motor, and then also electronics to charge the battery. But also another aspect is coming that, if you have probably heard from others, that this terminology initially used grid to vehicle, G2V, that's abbreviation is called. And later on, different terminology came, vehicle to grid came, probably SA Power Network may be interested in that aspect. But now it's called vehicle to X. X means everything. Another vehicle, another house, another apartment. Because electric vehicle, when it's stationary, it's same as the storage unit. You only need mobile if it's discharged. When I've talked about the efficiency aspect, that is important, which I would like to take your attention, that when I say, I also teach these topics heavily in different arenas, these charging aspects. Charging aspect is in very infant stage at the moment, because they are not intelligent enough yet. Regulatory frame hasn't been set yet. There is no standard accepted by everybody else yet. It is changing. You may say, why is it changing? It's not also very much pronounced. In the power electronics, is effectively deals with the semiconductor devices, like transistors, as we know. A couple of revolutions happened over the years. One was the first invention of the MOSFET, which we call it. Other one is MOSFET. It's MOSFET transistor. It's a kind of transistor that revolutionized around 1970s. Around 1990s, IGBT came. It's called insulated gate bipolar transistor. Now, almost all the power electronics, renewable energy systems, many vehicle aspects, charging, discharging, motor control, commonly involve this IGBT technology. But within the last 5 years, another device came, which is called wide bandgap devices. Wide bandgap devices. W, correct.
And
BG, WBG. Two transistors are already in the market. One is called gallium nitride. Other one is called silicon carbide. It's already in the market. It's taking over effectively. You may say, what is this special about it? What's special about it, if you compare to the earlier technology, these earlier transistors doesn't operate as about certain temperature. Therefore, it limits the operations. It cannot operate under sun or in a hot environment. It can operate if you make a cooling system very large.
Right.
Because when you talk about these systems, it comes with a cooling system. In fact, majority of these volumetric, gravimetric aspects come from the cooling system. Therefore, these devices reduces shrinking the cooling requirements, operate at high temperature, as well as operate at high frequency. What that means that things shrink. Like this size of converter earlier will shrink to this size. It's already proven industrial level. What that means in my prediction, that will become a part of the vehicle soon.
Sorry.
Like charging will become a part of the vehicle.
Yeah, but sorry, are you saying the battery swells and shrinks?
No, not battery.
The volumetric, the size, increasing density, you'll have a smaller volumetric footprint for in one battery.
As a system.
But hasn't the power density reached sort of like a plateau? Or is these gallium nitride and
no, two things. I think, I will like to explain. There is a battery.
Yeah.
To operate this battery, you need electronics. I'm talking about this electronics.
Okay.
The power or energy or power is a part of the battery operation.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe come to this. If the battery, theoretically, batteries are designed for primarily as a technical aspect, we talk about the C rating. What C rating means is that rating defines how quickly you can charge the battery, how quickly you can discharge the battery. Discharging the battery related to the motor, which accelerates, gets the power as much as possible, puts to the vehicle accelerate. That's the speed aspect. But other aspect is charging. You can, if the C charging of the battery is larger, technical term, you can charge the battery very fast. Instead of 4 hours, you can charge in 15 minutes. But you have to give this system here, electronic system, should be capable of giving that current to charge the battery. That's what I'm talking. That's the key. It means if our system can handle the large current, we can charge the battery faster. Yeah. Or the next phase is, of course, maybe we may call it this is a grid, or some other source which this will take and charge the battery. It's effectively, that's what I'm talking, the system level. What I'm saying that there is of course improvement is already happening, hasn't finished yet in batteries, but the electronics is changing. That's what I'm trying to say. Drastically changing. Part of it, the size, when this size shrinks, my point is charging system will not be a separate unit. These bulky systems assembled here and there, it will be a part of the vehicle. This will go inside the vehicle.
You might have to wrap it up because we're not...
Sorry, yeah.
We're going to run out of
time. Yeah. I think I mostly talk about what I would like to say in return. Yeah, sorry.
Did you want to add to that? So, just give us a very brief overview of what it is you want to say. That way we can go back to the discussion.
Mine would be very quick. So, good morning. In my opinion, as the world faces the urgent challenges of climate change and energy security, the transition to electric vehicles has never been so critical and timely. So electric vehicles represent a key solution, perhaps to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, with transportation contributing to almost a quarter of global carbon dioxide emissions. So by moving away from internal combustion engine and embracing this new technology, we are closer to reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and lowering the harmful emissions. Also, the electrification of vehicles also pivotal for enhancing the energy resilience by embracing technologies like vehicle to grid or vehicle to X that Nassimi mentioned. We are enabled the electric vehicle not only consume the electricity but also charge back or feed back the power to the grid, and that increase the grid stability as well as reduce the operational cost. At the end, in my opinion, the shift to electric vehicles is not just a technological evolution, but also a strategic imperative to meet our climate changes, our climate goals, and enhance the energy security. And I think it is a decision that we make today is going to shape the future, our next generation, when the days come.
Okay. I will go to my colleagues for questions. I'm going to go to those. We've got two colleagues online, Jenny Ware and Bert Van Marnen. Jenny, are you online? And if so, do you have any questions? And if you do, please keep it to just a straight question, because we don't have a lot of time and there's a lot of things I'd like to get to. Jenny? Bert, can you hear me?
Yeah, Tony, sorry. No, I'm good with, well, I suppose I've got one question. Given the complexity of the current grid and the growing level of energy consumption, we're now seeing, particularly overseas, Amazon, Microsoft and others buying power plants, more specifically nuclear power plants, to generate sufficient energy to run their data centres. And as we've spoken about earlier, we're going to have a growing need on the grid for charging electric vehicles, both passenger vehicles and increasingly heavier vehicles, buses and trucks, etc. What concerns do you have about the current design and engineering of the grid to accommodate that?
Okay. Who wants to try and respond to that?
So,
Start first.
Yeah, so in my opinion, for the grids, we are looking at infrastructure facilities for enabling using the existing technologies like vehicle to grid and grid to vehicle. So in Australia, especially when we have renewable energy like wind and solar, by developing the infrastructure and putting more charging stations, which are enabled to use these resources, these renewable resources, is going to help us to use the benefit of these renewable energies, and having the storage is a mobile storage at the end. These electric vehicles are, and then they help us to trade the energy and reduce the cost of electricity. That sort of infrastructure around the city and around the country globally is very important, and especially when it comes to fast charging. So imagine we can charge a battery or electric vehicle instead of 4 hours, having that capability from the power electronic side, as well as the batteries technologies, being able to adapt that amount of energy into it, store it, then we can charge instead of 4 hours, we can charge it in 1 hour. Instead of having 1 C battery, having 4 C battery, it is going to reduce the time. And also we need to have a capability within the power electronic to able to provide that amount of power from these solar photovoltaic system, solar system, as well as the wind wind system, and all it will be all around the converting using the power electronic to the DC voltage, which is consumed by the batteries and EVs.
Thank you. Did you want to add to that?
Oh, yes, I would like that. It is slightly different view. As you probably already observed that when the renewable comes more, energy price went up. Some of the reason is primarily because the consumption went down. Individual consumer consumption went down because they can generate electricity. What happened in this free market concept, when the consumption went down, the distribution, transmission companies, generation companies are selling less electricity. But the same infrastructure, especially in South Australia, infrastructure, for instance, the length of the transmission lines per capita is 2-3 times more than others. This has to be maintained. Even in recent increase of the energy price doesn't increase much, but the service costs increase. It's primarily due to this. Okay, where is this coming from? It means less energy is consumed. What's happening globally in the world? Electrification is promoted in every area. That includes mining, that includes heating, water, and this and that. Yeah. They are also promoting the electric vehicles. The simple idea is that consumption can increase, therefore they can sell more energy. Okay, means capacity is there. Capacity is there in terms of grid size, because we are not, for instance, South Australia, maximum power is 3,000 plus megawatt, and we are only using an average 1,000 below. It means high capacity is there, peak capacity is there. Key is how do you control the peak power in those critical times. I did run also one ARENA project together with the SA Power Network. We were the first group developed battery technologies. It was a part of the ARENA project. It was called Australian Energy Storage Knowledge Bank. We developed, we included, even I included very technical aspects in my new book as well. The key is, as I was going back to these aspects here, it means if you want to charge the electric vehicle, if you are taking, yes, you may have a what's called a nuclear power station. I'm following those technologies, but it's not there yet. In my view, energy price will never go down in this structure, never, unless some regulatory structures clearly address what the issues are, such as retailer. I cannot understand why the retailer is there. Retailer has no function in operation of the system. That's my view. Second thing is, if we are going to charge many electric vehicles using that advanced developing technology I mentioned, that if it comes, you need a source. Where is that source coming from? Someone has to trade energy. Electricity should be available when the demand is requested. My view is the best thing to do to develop many charger stations, but not to connect to the grid. What is called, which is started to implement in the New South Wales and Victoria, it's called community level storage. What community level storage means, having multiple houses localized. Yeah. It is also power system security level is very great, because the future technology has to address the power system security, cyber security. Centralized system has to go to address that. When you go that, you have to have a microgrids, community level storage, getting all the rooftops energy, storing in a high power batteries, which can easily charge any vehicle you can think of, instantly and quickly, with a zero load to the grid. This technology is already possible and available. That's what I would like to see. Multiple microgrids, every communities, no rooftop restrictions. You can use entire roof spaces, put all the electricity. These are all calculated. And plus, this system costs at least half of the cost of the individual house with the batteries. And plus, regulates, addresses the power system security, SA Power Network worries, voltage rise, voltage falls. I think, in my view, nobody can prevent this uptake of renewable energy, because first time in the history, we can generate our own energy. The biggest hit will come when people saw that this electricity price is going up, it's not worth doing it. As they restrict it, as the cost comes down, everybody will build their battery storage system. What that means that, as we observed in Mount Barker about 5 years ago, the about a couple of weeks in total per year, energy flow is zero. What zero means? This was the data
in Mount Barker.
Yes.
Yeah.
It means zero power flow means that everything is generated internally.
Does Mount Barker have a community battery system?
No. Households.
Yeah, the households.
Yeah, but I don't call that one as a community.
Yep.
What I mean, community battery means not individual households. It's a central, a larger battery fed from those multiple streets.
Yeah.
The houses has only the PV systems accommodated, but that central battery provides the power effectively. This technology does exist. It started happening.
Look, we're going to run out of time. Dan, I'll go to you if you have a quick question. But
my question's just around Amin's report into vehicle to grid project that you guys started at Flinders University in 2023. Can you just give us a bit of a rundown on that? Just a quick one.
Oh, so I haven't been involved directly.
Oh, okay, that's all right then.
But that's okay. My studies has been connection of a vehicle to homes mainly. So that's what I have particularly started a couple of years ago. And my finding is that, okay, if, for example, the electricity price is now around 48 or let's say 50 cents per kilowatt hour, if we can use having a solar system in the houses, and then we buy the electric vehicle, we can still charge our electric vehicle, meet the demand of our electric vehicle, and reduce the cost of electricity about 10 cents cheaper. So then we can bring it to 40 cents per kilowatt hour if we have a plan and stick to the plan of charging and discharging on a routine basis. And my study has been based on the daily average of car commutating in Adelaide, and based on the average daily consumption of household, typical household in South Australia. That's what I have in particular.
Okay,
that's very interesting result that I have been able to see.
Thank you.
David, hand over to you.
Yeah, just
no debate question.
Yeah, the 1C to 4C range charging batteries. Are there commercially available 4C standard batteries now in cars or anywhere?
Probably 4C is stationary is there.
And what are they, lithium ion or are they
they're
nickel, cobalt?
Yes, they are mainly lithium ion topologies at the moment. Mainly stationary is there 4C, and even more than that available. I think the 2C is quite common in vehicles.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Are they what sort of chemistry are they?
Lithium-based chemistry so far.
Right.
But I just visited Japan recently, about a week ago, for 2 weeks. Visited Nissan, Toyota, and others. They are mainly also looking at the solid-state batteries. Especially Toyota is looking.
Yeah.
That looks promising. I guess other things I will add briefly. Technology, it has just started.
Yeah,
I will
sure.
say it's not mature yet.
Yeah, and those transistors that you're talking about, are they? That's different from what is it?
Silicon. Silicon-based, different.
Yeah.
What we call it electron volt level. If I give you an example, electron volt level is in silicon is 1.2.
Yeah.
These devices goes up to 3.5, 6. What that means, act like an insulator when it's not operating.
Right.
And they handle very large current.
So are they installed in what bit of kit?
Yes, people develop. In fact, I involved one company, what's it called? Fuel Management Technologies, FMT, Adelaide-based company.
Yeah.
They developed one inverter using, I believe, SiC, means silicon carbide.
Yeah.
They developed 100 kilowatt system for mining vehicles. I did involve in the testing aspects of it at the university because we have testing facilities as well as I have experience.
But they're here in town?
They're in Adelaide.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
I did involve with Red Arc as well. I guess if I give you sort of my feeling is that in overall, Adelaide has capabilities in overall. South Australia has capabilities. Value-added products can easily come in these areas.
Yeah. So what does Red Arc? That's another company here in Adelaide?
Yes, correct.
Red Arc.
They are heavily involved in the similar developing what we call converters for trucks. They also recently developed charging systems for batteries. They are down south.
Right.
Probably that's the only electronic company left anyway. I think.
Okay.
We have run out of time. Look, it may be that as a committee, if we can arrange another time, even by video conference.
I'm happy. I'm very keen on these areas. As I said, I spend my time, even in this book, I heavily talked.
Yeah, because I would have liked to.
There are lots of solutions.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in hearing them.
I'm happy to be available.
So, rather than today, where we've got other witnesses ready to go, perhaps the Secretariat can organise another day where we can do, as I say, even a video conference.
Oh, it's fine.
Just pursue some of the discussion
More than happy to be involved.
We've kicked off today. All right, well, with that, I thank both of you for coming along today, and you will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence that you've given to the committee. If you feel you need to make any changes to that or any additions, feel free to do so. I think that's about it, and I think we will have another discussion, and so we'll contact you about a time.
Email response.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I now welcome witnesses from Mitsubishi Australia, or Mitsubishi Motors Australia Limited, to give evidence to the committee. Sean, how are you? Just a couple of formalities I need to go through before I invite you to make an opening statement. And just for your interest, because I know you only just walked in, I'm chairing this hearing. Dr. David Gillespie is the Deputy Chair. Dan Rapaccioli, member for Hunter, is here with us. We also had two members online that are listening in, and that is Jenny Ware and Bert Van Marnen. And so if they're still online, they will also be hearing and participating in the hearing today. That's just to give you an overview. The formal part, although the committee doesn't require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you, if you wish, to make an opening statement. We do have your written submission, which I thank you for and which I thought was very good. But if you want to make a brief opening statement, perhaps highlighting the points that you want the committee to take away, and then we might just go into a discussion, given the time that's available.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, committee, for giving us the opportunity to testify before you today. Mitsubishi Motors has been a proud part of the Australian landscape for over 40 years. We've been headquartered in Adelaide since 1980, and we are a leading Australian automotive distributor of high-quality SUVs and light commercial vehicles capable of handling Australia's roughest terrains. We have approximately 200 employees directly employed by Mitsubishi around the country, and a further 5,000 staff employed through just over 200 dealerships spread across the country. So Mitsubishi Motors is a key economic contributor to both Australia and to rural and provincial Australia. Adventure is what differentiates us. This is our purpose. The reason we do what we do is we drive Australians to be more adventurous, and we recognise that adventure means something different to everyone, whether it's travelling to the outback, driving to the beach, or going camping. This brings me to why Mitsubishi Motors has lodged a submission to this inquiry and why we are appearing before you today. Sustainability is one of our key strategic pillars, and we have supported the government's new vehicle efficiency standard. Mitsubishi Motors is proud to invest in technology that lowers emissions from individual vehicle units. Our cars are at the forefront of innovation, and we are currently collaborating with Nissan and Honda on electrification and environmental technologies. We also take a pragmatic approach. We believe that Australia is not yet ready for a full EV revolution due to the current state of technology, lack of charging infrastructure, and compounded by the complexities of unique Australian design rules. We need to take the time to fully review and mitigate ways in which the policy might inadvertently create adverse outcomes for consumers, whether through increased prices or decisions by automotive manufacturers to restrict certain model availability. The energy transition is not a sprint, and as much as we would like it to be, it is more of a marathon. I know we only have a short time frame for my opening statement, so allow me to conclude with 2 recommendations from Mitsubishi Motors. We believe that the government needs to assist consumers and car manufacturers in this energy transition by taking 2 steps. Firstly, continue to incentivize the purchase of both PHEVs and electric vehicles. PHEV sales are up 120.5% year to date and 89.9% year on year, largely due to the exemption from fringe benefits tax, which the National Automotive Leasing and Salary Packaging Association attributes to nearly 45% of novated lease sales being PHEV. Yet, this extension is set to expire on the 1st of April 2025. So why stop an incentive that consumers are just beginning to adjust and to adopt, as shown by increased sales? Outside of early adopters, the choice for most people is not between a PHEV and an EV, but between a PHEV and an internal combustion engine. PHEVs have proved to be a bridging technology on the road to net zero. So help consumers make the more environmentally friendly choice by continuing to incentivize PHEVs and making them more affordable. Secondly, we urge the government to harmonise Australian design rules with international best practice to reduce costs and complexities associated with supplying vehicles to the Australian market. Australia is a small right-hand drive market accounting for just over 1 million sales, new vehicle sales per year, which is around 1% of total global sales, niche by global standards. Designing and manufacturing vehicles in limited quantities to a unique Australian standard in limited quantities increases costs for consumers and limits the number of models available locally. Currently, depending on the vehicle, obtaining approval for the Australian market production and shipping can take 18 to 24 months, a timeline we don't have in terms of the NVES. We firmly believe that the largest barrier for automotive manufacturers introducing new fuel-efficient vehicles is the lengthy Australian type approval process. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Sean, thanks for that. Can I just go to the very last comment you made, the lengthy approval times? What are you referring to?
James?
Yep. So essentially, the type approval process in Australia comes at the end of, I guess, a more wider type approval process we need to go through. So already in Australia, which is fantastic, the majority of our design rules are already harmonised with European regulations, right. Which is does make our ability to develop vehicles better and easier. But essentially what we have to do is go through 2 processes. So in order to utilise the international approvals, and I'm talking UN harmonised regulations that come under the banner of the WP29 agreement, which Australia is a signatory to. WP29, that's Working Party 29. Before we commence the Australian type approval process, we need to get all of our vehicles for the majority of the Australian design rules first certified under the UN process, which can take upwards of around 6 to 12 months, depending on the complexity. And of course, before you do all that, you've got to actually then develop your design, make sure it can comply, and that in itself takes quite some time. I mean, you think about the development period of a vehicle, it's anywhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on the complexity. So we go through the first stage process, which is to get our, I guess, international type approval, for want of as a simple explanation. And then once we secure that, we move into the Australian type approval process, which adds at least another 3 to 6 months by the time we then assemble the data we need, submit it, get it approved. One of the things that we have to account for is the fact that the Australian type approval process has written into legislation that once we submit our application, they can take up to 60 business days to make the decision. So that's essentially another 3 months. Now, that doesn't mean it always takes that long, and in fact the department does a very good job and more often than not are approving our applications much faster than that. But of course we can't rely on that because the Act says it can be up to that period of time, so we need to account for that in our development process. And definitely in the case of Mitsubishi, obviously we have very strict conformity of production process, as you're required to have in any event to achieve a type approval in Australia. And that of course means we would never, for instance, start production of a new vehicle till we actually have the approval in hand. So essentially that's what generates that, I guess, long period of time to get an approval.
Thank you. I'll go to my colleagues. Dan, do you want to go next?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. With pretty much your last comment as well around that, and thank you for coming in, guys. Harmonise the Australian design rules with international best practice. What do we do differently? What are the ones that are different here that are causing you guys issues as well as the other manufacturers?
Yeah, probably the one that is the most technically difficult and is the current child anchor requirement. So in Australia we have a unique regulation, ADR 34, which is for child restraint anchorages, and it is not harmonised with any other global regulation in so far as it requires a centre tether position or tether point, which isn't required in markets such as Europe. So we cannot use say a European type approval to get to demonstrate compliance with ADR 34 because it doesn't have a mandated requirement for a centre tether. It doesn't mean you couldn't have one in Europe, but it's not mandatory to have one in Europe. So.
Is there any feedback or any studies done that ours is safer than Europe's or Europe's is safer than ours?
I don't believe that work. Well, that would have to happen. So if we were to go through a process, I think, to try and harmonise, then normal due diligence of regulatory development will probably look at that topic. I'm not aware of myself of any study that's looked at the merits or otherwise, or the cost or otherwise of whether that tether anchor should or shouldn't be there. But I guess from my own, I guess if you think about it from the fact of, Europe are an advanced economy. They're not in the business of taking risks with the safety of their children. If they are satisfied that their child safety regulations are robust, then I don't know why we would question that.
And with that, what extra cost does that put to you guys as manufacturers to bring that vehicle to this country with having to have that spec?
Okay, so I couldn't give you a specific figure, but it's if you think about what's involved, it's a structural item of the vehicle. So we would be talking hundreds of thousands or more if you had to start from zero and change the design of the vehicle to meet that, simply because it becomes a fundamental structural element of the vehicle. So it's very expensive to develop that. I can't give you an exact figure, but it's very expensive.
No worries, thank you.
Yep.
But I think to add to that, what it does add is significant cost and complexity. And there are requirements outside of just the anchor tether we're talking about just that point, but there are other additional requirements, including ANCAP requirements, which are unique to Australia, which adds, we're less than 1% of the world's production, plus we're a right-hand market, and the majority of the world's vehicle production is left-hand drive. So it adds significantly to cost and complexity, and it would just take any one of us to drive around Europe or many other countries around the world, and you'll see a significantly larger variety of vehicles that are available to the population. So what we're doing is we're actually adding cost and complexity and making cars less affordable for Australians and giving them less choice by having these unique design elements. Now, the logic behind it, I would argue, goes back to the time that we had automotive manufacturing in Australia. And these measures were probably designed to protect the Australian vehicle manufacturers. The reality is 10, 15 years down the line, we've moved on, the world's moved on, there's no longer manufacturing, and we are questioning the validity of having these unique requirements that add cost and complexity and slow down and reduce the variety of cars that develop to Australians.
Sean, can I just ask on that? Because you referred to this issue in your submission, and I'd noted it. Have you ever made a submission to the government or to ANCAP, and by the way, we visited the ANCAP facilities, to actually go back to, say, European standards or whatever the case is? Has anybody made that request to our regulators?
Yes. Let me say, ANCAP probably feel very strongly about themselves as being the world's leading innovators around safety, and for some reason they would argue, I'm sure, that they are making the world safer for Australians. Our simple argument is that whether it's Japan, United States, America, there are many advanced economies out there whose safety standards are deemed to be adequate by 350 million Americans and 150 million Japanese and however many 100 million Europeans.
Sure.
What would make us that unique? And it's all about cost and complexity. And we're not arguing for a reduction in safety standards at all. We're just saying harmonisation. Let's achieve a global standard which makes it quicker, faster and easier to bring product to Australia.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, on that same line, in Australia you have to have behind each baby capsule, you have to have a point behind it, another point, another point. What the Europeans just have a central one for all of them. Yeah.
No, the European essentially have an ISOFIX system, which we can also use, and they have for the outboard seats, yes, you can have the lower points, and also ISOFIX system then has the two upper points as well. So essentially a 3 anchor point system as ISOFIX. And most of our vehicles have that too. Definitely our vehicles have that type of system available in them. The difference is that then we add an additional requirement, have only the top tether for the centre position. So generally speaking, that means that in Australia, vehicles will have the 3 top tethers, and most will have also the lower anchors, which aren't actually mandatory by Australian design rule regulation. That's like an optional situation, but definitely you'd find they would have the 3 upper positions. And the centre one is the one that we're talking about, which is the unique mandatory requirement that isn't actually mandatory in Europe.
Right, okay. Yeah. In terms of making things in Australia again, I know there's other companies that are looking at, tiny little key cars, like the smart car and, various iterations of it. Has Mitsubishi got something like that in your product suite that we could make in Australia for you?
If I can separate the two, the making in Australia, I'll come back to that as a separate, but let me start by answering the K car, which is the small car. And the answer is yes, we have one of those. We have an EV of one of those. We brought it to Australia. Many journalists have driven it. It's a car that we could bring to Australia tomorrow if there weren't all these other impediments we've just been speaking about. So the whole concept of the K car is that it has a smaller battery size, but because the car is that much smaller, it's that much more compact, and it's that much lighter, that for the same size battery as a PHEV, you actually have a full EV, which would be the perfect city car. Now, that car meets Japanese safety standards, which cater for all your crash, collision, and meets quite a high standard of regulation. However, if we had to bring it to Australia, it would not meet the ANCAP requirements, because ANCAP has additional, I'm going to call it electronic ADAS, we call it, requirements, which add significant cost to the car. So suddenly you take an entry-level car, and you add all this technology, and it jumps from being an affordable 25 or 30k car, and suddenly it jumps to being a 40 or 45k car. And that is part of our concern around having all these additional, and that's in this case I'm talking ANCAP requirements. They take what would be a very pragmatic, pure EV solution, perfectly, and as our cities densify, and as we have more people and have more housing prices, we can have densification of cities. So those type of vehicles would be the perfect solution We have one ready to go. It's running around the streets of Japan. But we have brought it here, and we have assessed that it would probably only meet an Australian 3-star NCAP. And in Australia, the way NCAP positions itself is 5-star or nothing. So that creates obstacles or barriers for us to bring those cars in, which is exactly why we've raised the point.
Could I just follow up with that one for 1 sec? Yeah. There's a lot of other manufacturers that bring in vehicles that aren't meeting the 5-star rating either. Can you still bring it in anyway? As long as it meets the Australian standards.
Yeah,
there is plenty of people that are, and we just were told there's going to be 40 to 80 new EVs in the market very soon. Manufacturers in the market. That's a lot. Yeah. They're not all going to have They're not all going to have 5-star ratings.
Now that's actually brings up a very good point, actually, because ANCAP itself is not regulation. So yes, you can bring in a vehicle, and we can type approve a vehicle that meets all of the minimum Australian safety requirements, and either choose not to rate the vehicle, because to rate a vehicle with ANCAP, unless ANCAP choose to do it themselves, and they don't do that very often, it's a sponsored rating. So the importer or the manufacturer, they pay for the ANCAP rating. So you can choose not to do that, and you can still sell the vehicle in Australia. But if you want to sell the vehicle at scale in Australia, you need to be able to sell into the larger fleets.
You can't get in a fleet.
And if you don't have the rating, then you get excluded from that. For instance, the federal government have a 5-star policy in their vehicle purchasing, and in fact, I believe recently they even brought the year rating back. They only want to consider 5-star vehicles with a rating that's only 3 years old. So, and that becomes the ceiling. So it almost becomes, it's not regulation, but it's almost pseudo-regulation, because if you want to sell at scale, you need to have the rating. And if you don't achieve the 5-star rating, you will be excluded. And I suppose one of the things that happens is that and as it should, the threshold for achieving the 5-star rating increments up every 3 years. So that doesn't mean that the vehicles we're rating now are in 3 years' time suddenly become unsafe. That's not correct at all. But to maintain that 5-star level, you've got to start to keep adding additional technology. And one of the things that isn't present in that is the checks and balances that we have in regulation. So is the addition of those technologies actually achieving the benefit that you would expect for the costs involved, added cost to the consumer, and so on and so forth? Those checks and balances aren't there, which is fine in the case of if it's consumer information or if it becomes like a goal to achieve. But the way the current policy network sits is, well, if you don't have the 5-star rating, you're excluded. So it kind of becomes a default minimum level. Yeah. And the way that gets reported and discussed in Australia is that essentially ANCAP will indicate that if you didn't achieve 5-star, you were somehow deficient. Yeah, the messaging is Europe is slightly different. So, and if you go to the Euro NCAP website, if you're a 4-star, it'll stay. Yeah, well, that's a good overall level of safety, but maybe you don't have the absolute world top state-of-the-art technology in your vehicle right now. So that's kind of the challenge we face. So,
could I come back? You made it. Sorry, if I may. You made a comment which is very valid. Is that you said there are about 40 to 80, depending. Pick a number. The challenge we're going to have in the future is not the lack of EV supply in terms of the number of cars, which we've heard quoted before. I think, and this comes back to the PHEV, our biggest concern is with the ambitious NVES targets and the timeline against those, there's not going to be a lack of supply. Now, I was visited the US earlier this year, went to the largest dealer association conference in the world, and the American dealers were saying that government legislated, we know the American government has legislated, OEMs, which is car manufacturers, built the product. Customers aren't buying it. And those dealers were under financial distress, and I was there a couple of months ago, and they are still under financial distress because they are sitting with large volumes of EVs on their floor that customers aren't buying. So what I'm really saying to the committee, our biggest challenge here is not the lack of supply of EVs, it's getting consumers to buy the product. And the biggest impediment that we have right now, and this is our challenge, is that motor manufacturers are going to face extreme penalties despite the fact that they have EVs. The problem's going to be, and we're a free country, people have free choice. We cannot force people to buy EVs. And the challenge with people buying EVs right at the moment is the lack of infrastructure and charging infrastructure. So, and we tend to draw the curtain at that and say it's just infrastructure. There's actually grid capacity behind that, and getting the right power in the right place at the right time. And then also economies of scale, considering that Australia, and there are many comparisons made, and I believe flawed, against Europe. Australia is the 6th largest landmass in the world, with a very small population of 26 million people, a very small taxpayer base, which has to fund a very significant infrastructure over a very significant landmass in an extremely short period of time, in order for car companies to avoid the kind of penalties that will be imposed on us, and through no fault of our own. And I think, if I may put before the committee our biggest concern, and I think our biggest challenge collectively, because we want to mitigate emissions, we want to reduce the impact, we're not against that. What we need to do is enable that and facilitate that, and that requires infrastructure. And that is one of the reasons that we're advocating for the PHEV extension of the fringe benefit tax, because our research that we've done on Mitsubishis in Australia is that our customers use the car in full EV mode 81% of the time. Now, again, a lot of people don't know the difference between a hybrid, which always has a petrol motor, which is always working, and has small batteries which then facilitate recharging from the braking and then facilitate the car. Our vehicle, the PHEV, the technology is totally different. Our vehicles can operate in full EV mode, and I drive one, and I do. And I drive, and I actually showed somebody the other day, 98% of the time I drive in pure EV, because the range is enough to get me to work and back every day on a full electrical charge. So I seldom, if ever, use the engine. But if I did want to do that trip to Melbourne, or to Sydney, or to Darwin, or to Perth, I do not have to worry about my range. And range with an electric vehicle is variable. Depends on the weather, depends on whether the wind's blowing, it depends on the traffic. So when you buy a car, you get a stated range. That can be very variable, and that creates anxiety, as known as range anxiety. It's actually been studied in the UK, at the university there. It's actually now a psychological phenomenon known as range anxiety. And that is the problem that we have. There's a psychological obstacle or block to mass adoption of EV in the short term, because Australia's infrastructure is not yet at the point that gives people the peace of mind to go, I can buy one and I don't have to worry about where it gets charged. So there's, I think, that issue, and then there's a bigger issue around, and I overheard the previous professor talking about it, is and I'm sure you're all aware of it, is that the current battery technology has limitations when it comes to large vehicles, particularly what we call utes, LCVs, light commercial vehicles, and also large SUVs. Now, the Australian lifestyle is such, and the nature of business in Australia is that more than 90% of businesses in Australia are small business, employ less than 10 people. Majority of them have at least 1 or 2 or 3 utes in their fleet. These are the vehicles that keep the wheels of Australia turning. And the current technology, battery technology, is not where it should be yet. We need a step change in technology, in terms of more solid-state batteries and other forms of technology to allow us to keep the wheels of Australia turning. And that's the other concern. And again, if I may digress, I heard the previous person's submission around, theoretically we can have all these solar panels charging our cars, but that's a theoretical model. If we get into the practical world, this is a tradie that's out on the job all day. He hasn't got time to plug it into solar during the day and charge his battery to use tonight. So the vehicle to grid is a great technology, but we also need to understand that the majority of vehicles on the road in Australia, whether you be a farmer or a tradie or somebody doing, or a delivery courier company doing a job, which is where the majority of business is, your vehicle is on the road from morning to night. There isn't time to soak up that energy, put it in your battery and put it back onto the grid tonight. And even if you're living in or working in the city, high density, you're parking in a parking garage. Where's your solar panel, mate? You're not going to charge the car in the day. So I think we should also, there's theoretical models and there's practical real world. And our job is to keep the economy of Australia progressing, growing and being successful. To do that, I think we need some more practical solutions.
David, you had another question?
No, I think, yes, solid state batteries, what's the difference between that and a lithium ion battery? Is that
So
sort of
I'm
the
not a
liquid-
battery expert, but at its most layman's simplistic term, the current battery technology uses a fluid,
Yeah.
and the ions move through a fluid. Now, the step change in technology is that will become a solid state, which will allow a higher energy density in the battery. It'll be able to store more energy and transport it more effectively, more quickly, which will give you more power, which will give you more payload and towing capacity, but also more power in the battery, so you have a longer battery cycle.
Sure.
The problem is that all of this technology is still in its infancy. And the reality is that we have examples of utes out there that are PHEV or electric, and the reality is they're great show ponies, they look good, they cost a lot of money. Both of them are well in excess of $100,000, which middle income Australia, which is the majority of your courier companies, tradies, cannot afford those vehicles. And even if they did, they couldn't use them as workhorses. They can't tow their trailers full of tools. They can't load bags of cement or drums of paint on the back. The range drops with the current technology. So we are having significant penalties imposed on us when in fact there is not a technological solution and a large part of our market is actually farmers and tradies. Triton is our biggest workhorse. And our customers are going, I need to do a job, mate. I've got to travel. I haven't got time to sit and charge. If I'm a tradie and some of those current electric utes have 140k range when you put a heavy load on them. Guy goes, I haven't got time to sit and charge it for an hour. I've got jobs to do. I need to get out to Western City or wherever it needs to be. We've got farmers who need to travel long distance, carry heavy payloads, tow, and they're going, I can't use this.
Politicians too.
I'm glad to hear that.
I do 1,000 Ks on a weekend, no worries.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so what we're not advocating for, and I want to make this clear, Mitsubishi understands the need to mitigate climate change. We understand that I think there's a bit of a mismatch between the ambition of the not the policy, we need a policy, but the penalties and when the penalties are imposed and when the technology doesn't even exist in this space. And we do not want to put jam in the cogs of our industry, of our businesses in Australia.
Bert, are you on the line by any chance? I think he might have just dropped out. Yeah, I think that might have been him when we heard the ding. Jenny, are you on the line? No. Well, my other two colleagues are not there. Sean, I've just got maybe one final question because we have just about run out of time and I don't want to hold you up any longer. With the plug-in hybrids, you talk about a range of about 100 k's or thereabouts, whatever it is. Has the technology improved the range for them as well, or do you think it will?
Yes. So what we've noticed is that our original, James, do you know what the original PHEV?
So original, the range was around 50
56
kilos, 56 kilometres. Yeah, around that, 56.
So Mitsubishi developed the technology. Mitsubishi was the world's first, we developed the world's first mass-produced electric vehicle as well.
Yep.
The little IMF back in 2009. The problem is the world wasn't ready for it then yet. We also developed we actually developed PHEV technology. We were the world's first design of that. And our initial Outlanders, and we sold in excess of 400,000 of those, had a range of about 56 kilometres.
Yeah.
We have subsequently improved that. So the current version, as we sit here today, the car that I'm driving, has between 86 and 90.
Right.
We have just released a new version of that in Europe, which will be coming to Australia next year, where the range is up to around 100. Now, our research shows us, and Victoria did a different research that showed in Victoria the average commute per day is 25 kilometres. The average commute, on average in Australia, is 35. So the PHEV very comfortably gives you your full commute. Now, I do happen to have solar at home, and I'm fortunate enough that our business premises also have solar. So I have zero emissions, and I have a zero petrol bill. 98% of my life. On average, 81% of our consumers who have bought our cars will use them in pure electric mode. So we could reduce emissions by 81% immediately today without any of the infrastructure concerns that we're talking about, without significant investment. That has to come. We're not saying it shouldn't happen. We've got to get the grid right, and we've got to get the distribution right, and we've got to get the charging infrastructure right. We have to move to that world. But we need to align our ambition with the pace at which that happens. And we are advocating that PHEV gives you a solution right now that can significantly reduce emissions without any range anxiety, without any concerns about the ability or capability of the vehicle. You can still tow your load with this PHEV as well, because the ICE engine will kick in and give you that capability when you need it. So we do believe that PHEV, and that is why we as a company have chosen, while we do have EVs in our portfolio, we believe that the right technology for Australia right now is the PHEV. And that's why we're requesting that the fringe benefit tax be extended, because the early adopters have bought the BEVs. We've reached the point where those who can have, and we now need to get the rest of Australia to transition. And all our research shows that the best way to transition from a pure combustion engine is through the PHEV, because it has that significant reduction in emissions without any of the penalties.
Do your competitors make PHEV?
They do, yes. There are a number of competitors who make PHEVs. And
so there is choices therefore?
Oh, absolutely, across multiple, from luxury all the way through to lower entry brands as well. Yeah.
Can I just follow on one thing from there,
sure.
Tony?
Sure.
Your new Triton looks smick. It looks very nice. Yes. It's a very good designed car. Is there any hope that's going to come out in plug-in hybrid at some stage to compete with the Ford Ranger that's going to come out next year with it, and possibly the Shark as well?
Yeah. So the answer is that Mitsubishi Motors, and our global CEO made the statement when he was here in Australia in July to our dealers, is that we are investigating a full suite of technologies, because we believe that there's no single silver bullet. So we will be looking at everything from hybrid to plug-in hybrid to full BEV in order to design fit-for-purpose vehicles. And logically, we have to be looking at those options within the pickup range as well.
I live in regional Australia, same as David does. We both live in rural and regional areas.
Yes.
And range anxiety is definitely an issue.
Yes.
And this is the only way that it will give people some confidence to go into that area of
Totally agree.
And they still, in general, only do 50 Ks a day in general.
Agree.
Yeah.
And for that 50 Ks, now unfortunately, well, I won't talk about competitor product, but the reality is that the current technology, even although it's a PHEV pickup, the current technology does limit the battery range, but still, you'll already make a significant difference.
And 90% of our vehicles are SUVs or large utes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Utes, yeah.
Absolutely. So, totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Sean, if you've got time, David's got
just
one
one thing about the utes in particular.
Yes.
You end up on a lot of crappy roads, dirt roads.
Yes.
You often go through, if you're really rural, through fords, and the battery can get wet.
Yes.
And we've seen in these recent storms in America and floods in America, where a lot of the immersion means the chemistry gets ignited and you have a fire. I suppose in a city you're not going to worry, but is that still a theoretical or a real possibility with your products?
It depends very much on the manufacturer. I can put up my hand with confidence, and we have a PHEV advert with a famous gentleman called Russell Quett going through a water crossing, because we have in our vehicles made sure that water ingress is not an issue. I can't guarantee that for any other manufacturer, unfortunately, because some people do cut corners and they do try and reduce costs.
I don't think you've been asked for any additional information, but if you have, if you could provide it to the committee secretariat, I think it was the 9th of November, that would be appreciated. You will be sent a copy of the transcript of the evidence today, and again, if you feel you need to make any additions or changes to that, feel free to do so. If there's anything else that you at some stage want to send through to the committee that you think is relevant to our inquiry, always feel free to do so, because until we write the report, we're looking for as much information, given that things are changing so quickly all the time. So.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for giving us the opportunity, and thank you to the rest of the committee. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll give you my business card. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. No, South Africa. So I grew up in the Eastern Cape, studied
with that, and that ends the hearing today, so I declare this hearing closed.